Chapter 1299. The silence did not last long. But the one who broke the silence was neither Blackbeard nor Fong Boudoir, but Captain. At that moment, a loud and sonorous voice came from the lookout platform at the top of the mast. Maybe now is not the time, but I have to interrupt you. What's the matter? Blackbeard's gaze was still fixed on Fong Boudoir, and he had no intention of moving away, but he still responded to the lookout with a shout. There's a ship coming towards us at high speed from the southeast. From the tone of the lookout when he spoke to Blackbeard, it was easy to guess that he was not an ordinary person. In my opinion, they don't come with good intentions. Blackbeard heard this and thought for 2 seconds. Then, he adjusted his tone and voice to the appropriate level and said to Fong Boudoir in front of him, "Looks like we have to talk later." "It's okay, you go ahead." Fong Boudoir spread out his hands and replied with a non-committal look. "Huh." Blackbeard smiled. "But I still have to confirm." He paused. "When I'm busy, you won't take the opportunity to do something that will make me even busier, right?" "I won't," Fong Boudoir replied. "In fact, I'm going to help you." He reached out his hand and made a pleased gesture. "If possible, I hope you can treat me as an ally, or even a companion." "I see." Blackbeard heard this and said thoughtfully, "This is your mission this time, right?" "It's one of them." Fong Boudoir did not show any surprise at Blackbeard's choice of words, even though he heard the word mission, but I don't think I can explain it to you in detail. "It's okay. Knowing this is enough." Blackbeard finished speaking, immediately turned around and left. His steps were firm, steady, fast, and powerful. In the blink of an eye, he had walked all the way to the helmsman's tower located in the middle and rear of the hull. Blackbeard stood on high ground beside the railing in front of the helm. Under the watchful eyes of the pirates, he stood solemnly for a long time. After a while, he took a deep breath and shouted, "Bandits! Scum! My little bitches!" Speaking up to this point, he revealed a smile that could only be described as sinister. Hee. It's obvious that a group of reckless fellows are charging towards us. Just as he was about to give his pre-battle speech, the ship from the southeast was already closing in on them. Even the sailors with average eyesight could faintly see the silhouette of the ship. However, Blackbeard's attitude was still very calm. His calmness and eagerness came from his confidence as an overlord of the sea, as well as a primitive desire for slaughter. "I want to use their captain's skull to decorate my bookshelf. I want to use the skin of those crew members to sew war drums. I want to collect 100 spines to make carvings on the sides of the Queen's Revenge. I want to fill 12 barrels of human blood to be used as fuel for the Greek fire, a liquid combustion agent invented by the Byzantine Empire that can burn on water. I'm going to put their boat in a glass bottle and keep it as a permanent collection. I want to engrave fear deep into the souls of each and every one of them. Let the river Styx praise my name." Blackbeard's voice was like thunder. Every word of his was heard by everyone on the ship. Even the pirates below the deck and in the cabins all heard his declaration. "Do you understand?" A few seconds later, Blackbeard asked. "Ho! Ho!" All the pirates on the ship, no matter where they were, shouted in unison and in a loud and clear voice. "Very good." The corner of Blackbeard's mouth raised into a smile again, indicating that he was very satisfied with the response. After pausing for 2 seconds, he opened his mouth again. Then, just as he said these 2 words, they heard a long screech came from the side. Then there was a loud bang. It turned out that an enemy ship's cannonball had landed on the surface of the sea, only a few meters away from the Queen's Revenge. The power of the cannonball was very terrifying. The water splashed up like an evil dragon coming out of the water. "Oomph." Blackbeard saw this and just sneered. In the next second, he suddenly pulled out the sword of Triton, the messenger of the sea in ancient Greek mythology, the son of Poseidon, king of the sea and queen of the sea Amphitrite, from his waist. He raised it high to the sky and continued what he didn't say before. He shouted loudly, "Pirates, raise the sails, full rudder to the port." Once the captain gave the order, all the pirates on the ship moved like an arrow leaving the bow. Although these guys were usually lazy and irritable, at this moment, they instantly became more efficient than any well-trained army. In the blink of an eye, the pirates around Fong Boudoir and Snow, including Garlic Bro, had all disappeared without a trace. They ran, rolled, crawled, and swam. The pirates were like a swarm of bees, or like jumping monkeys bustling about on the deck. Under the command of the few cadres, these dozens of people quickly raised the sails, set up the cannons, prepared ammunition, swords, and ropes. In short, they were all ready for battle. And the enemy, although the identity of the enemy was still unclear, this kind of character who dared to attack the Blackbeard pirates was certainly not easy to deal with. "Captain, it's the brown algae." A little while later, when the outline of the ship became more distinct, the lookout shouted. When Blackbeard heard the name, his expression still didn't change. He just asked, "Whose flag is it?" "The one-eyed skull flag." The lookout shouted back. After a second, he added, "It's the Mad-Eye." When he said the name, most of the pirates on the deck were slightly stunned. Fong Bujue and Snow were very good at reading people's expressions. They immediately inferred something from the reaction of this group of pirates. "You saw it too, right?" Snow immediately asked softly. "Oh." Fong Bujue said, "From the changes in the expressions of these people around, that Mad-Eye is not easy to deal with." "Well," Snow said in a deep voice, "but no matter how difficult it is to deal with, it's not as strong as Blackbeard, right?" "That's for sure," Fong Bujue responded, "but it's this kind of enemy who is only one level lower than Blackbeard that is more difficult to deal with. Generally speaking, when two pirate groups with similar strength go up against each other, no matter who wins in the end, it will be a Pyrrhic victory." Speaking of this, Brother Jew's eyes moved slightly, and he changed the topic. "Also, I'm very concerned." "Concerned about what?" Snow quickly realized that Fong Bujue's gaze was moving downwards, as if he was looking through the things below the deck. "The shell that fell into the sea just now." Brother Jew muttered, "It's a little unusual." "Oh." When Snow heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then he thought for a moment and said, "Well, after what you said, it's indeed very strange." When the shell was fired, the other party's ship was still very far away from us. Assuming that their shooting range was only so far away, why would they continue to get closer? Even if they had a reason to get closer, why didn't they shoot again in the process of getting closer? The conclusion that he could draw from this self-questioning reasoning was the meaning of Brother Jew's words just now. That shell was special, or even the only one. But as for what it was specifically used for, even Fong Bujue did not know at the moment. "Raise the sails. Full speed ahead." Just as the two players were conversing, Blackbeard's voice once again rang throughout the ship. At this moment, the Queen Anna's Revenge had already turned to the bow of the brown algae after the previous adjustment of raising the sails and full rudder to the left. In other words, Blackbeard's order was basically equivalent to the crew steering the ship towards the enemy's ship. "Captain." At this moment, on the helmsman's deck, a black man who had been standing quietly beside Blackbeard all this while spoke to Blackbeard with a solemn expression. "The enemy is now following the wind, and they have already reached that kind of speed. If we collide with them head-on like this, Erdini," Blackbeard called out to him, interrupting him. "What are your orders, Captain?" "Yes, Captain," Erdini replied respectfully. "You don't have to participate in this battle," Blackbeard continued. "Now, go to the sea." Erdini did not show any dissatisfaction or doubt towards this seemingly suicidal order. He just calmly asked, "What do you want me to do in the sea? There's something wrong with the shell that fell just now." Blackbeard also very calmly replied, "Go and check it out. If everything is normal, come back to support." "Yes, Captain." Erdini received the order, turned around, and ran towards the side of the ship. When he reached the edge of the deck, he leaped and jumped into the murky sea outside the ship. At the same time, on the brown algae. "Captain, the enemy has turned the ship around and is heading towards us." Their lookout also shouted to the captain. "Nonsense, it's so close, I can see it myself." At the bow of the ship, a man with a dark blue captain's suit, a fierce-looking face, and a black eye patch on his left eye, immediately responded to his crew member with a grumpy tone. "This man is Mad-Eye, The name Mad Eye was obviously his nickname after he became a pirate. As for his real name, he had already forgotten it. Although Mad Eye always wore an eye patch on his left eye, in fact, he was not blind in that eye. Seeing this, a lot of people must be wondering, does he have a Sharingan? Is that eye patch a Reiki suppression device? Well, the answer will be revealed in the next chapter. Let's continue with the story. After Mad Eye shouted to his lookout, he took 2 steps forward and walked in front of another person. Then, as the captain of the ship, he changed his tone to one that was close to flattering. He said, Master, what do you think? What should we do next? The person called Master by Mad Eye was wrapped in a Western monk's robe, and his face was completely covered in shadows. In such a state, even if one stood in front of him, one would not be able to tell whether he was a man or a woman, old or young, human or ghost. You don't need me to teach you this, do you? Master's voice did not sound special. It was a very ordinary male voice. Most men in their 20s or 40s could have such a voice. You know how to fight a naval battle better than I do. Then, I will act according to the situation? Mad Eye asked tentatively. Just as the master was about to answer that question, suddenly he, who was hiding in the monk's robe, noticed something strange, and he said in his heart, Is that Fonbujue? He didn't know what method he used, but when there was still a certain distance between the 2 ships, he noticed that his brother Jew was on Blackbeard's ship. Not only that, those 2 guys are also there. Master thought, no, I can't contact them in this situation. I have to leave before they find me. He almost instantly made the decision to run and said calmly, Mad Eye, I have to go to the cabin to get something. You have full authority here. After saying this sentence, he turned around and was about to leave. Huh? This? Mad Eye saw this and hurriedly asked, Master, the battle is about to start. The Grand Master did not intend to explain anything to Mad Eye. He only spat out a syllable in a displeased tone. Just this action alone made Mad Eye take a step back in fear. I'm sorry, I said too much, Master, please. Mad Eye hurriedly lowered his head and took a few steps back. I will take care of this. Master didn't say anything to him and left silently. It wasn't until his figure entered the cabin below the deck and out of Mad Eye's sight that I let out a sigh of relief. This bastard, I don't know what he is doing. Even if the other party had gone far, I didn't dare to say this out loud. He just whispered. It wasn't difficult to see from Mad Eye's reaction. He didn't think that the master would run away. In Mad Eye's perception, the strength of this master was far above Blackbeard, and this was his biggest confidence and reliance in this attack. Mad Eye firmly believed that he, who was only a little worse than Blackbeard, as long as he had the help of this existence stronger than Blackbeard, he would be able to take the title of Pirate King. Oh no, Pirate King. Unfortunately, man proposes, God disposes. Mad Eye would never have thought that just a minute ago, he had become a victim in a change. Chapter 1300. A minute later, the distance between the 2 ships was less than 20 meters, and they were about to collide. However, Blackbeard never ordered to fire. As for Mad Eye, although he couldn't figure out what Blackbeard was planning, he was not the kind of captain who would change his original plan because of some doubts. So, he still followed his original plan and launched a round of cannons before the collision. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by a deafening roar, 16 shells flew out from the 16 bow cannons of the brown algae and blasted into the hull of the Queen Anna's Revenge. However, this round of cannons had no effect. Those cannonballs hit the hull of the Queen's Revenge. Not even a crack was left. It only caused a little shock to the pirates on the ship. Even the cannons of the brown algae can't do it. Seeing this scene, Mad Eye snorted and said, That ship is really a monster for this result. Although he was unwilling, he was not surprised. Because it was not the first time that Mad Eye stood on the deck of the Queen Anna's Revenge. In fact, he may be the pirate who survived the most times after being defeated by the Blackbeard pirates in the Chaos Sea. Many years ago, when Mad Eye was still a boy, the warship he was on was raided by the Blackbeard pirates. At that time, the soldiers on their ship were almost wiped out. Mad Eye hid in the smoke pipe in the kitchen and escaped. After a few years, Mad Eye became the bosun of a well-known pirate group. But he was unlucky. One day, the pirate group he was in was defeated by Blackbeard and was swallowed up. At that time, Mad Eye was captured alive, but he still refused to surrender when his captain was killed. Blackbeard saw that he was very courageous and decided to give him a chance. As for the specific content of the chance, it was to leave a dozen shallow knife wounds on Mad Eye's body and then throw him into a sea of sharks. In the end, Madman Eye did not die. He survived the attack of the sharks and returned to the nearby island. In the name of the dead captain, he gathered a group of old subordinates. For the first time in his life, he sat on the chair of captain. Just like that, many years passed, and Mad Eye himself finally became a great pirate. He had reached the peak of his pirate career. But perhaps it was fate. The one who ended his peak was still Blackbeard. Even though the crazy-eye pirates at that time were strong and in the limelight, they were still no match for the terrifying overlord of the sea. After a battle that lasted nearly an hour at sea, Madman was defeated. In the entire pirate regiment, all the crew members except him survived. In the end, Mad Eye decided to take as many as he could and ignited the gunpowder storage on his ship. But he didn't expect that. He was actually still alive. For the next half a year, Mad Eye, who had miraculously survived the explosion, had been recuperating on his sickbed. Until one morning, the news of Blackbeard's death suddenly spread throughout the entire chaotic ocean. At that time, no one had thought of the significance behind this piece of news. And by the time people came back to their senses, the era of the four-pillar gods had already arrived. Bang! Swish, 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 the collision happened. The bows of the two pirate ships suddenly touched and immediately tilted to one side. The sides of the two ships rubbed against each other, making a crazy rub sound. Little bastards. In the name of Mad Eye, in the name of the Blackbeard pirates. The captains on both sides shouted almost at the same time. The fierce pirates on the two ships also responded to the call of their captains. Each of them pulled out their weapons, glared at the enemies on the enemy's ship, and roared at the top of their lungs. Kill! Kill them! A second later, Blackbeard and Mad Eye issued the order to start the battle in unison. In that instant, the sounds of killing shook the heavens, and killing intent exploded. Between the hulls of the ships, on the slightly different decks, hundreds of murderers who had been through killing for a long time launched a battle of life and death. Ropes and silhouettes flew into the air. Swords, guns, gold, and iron rang together. Indeed, compared with the land war, the battlefield of the ship was too small. After a battle, the number of people on both sides was extremely limited. However, only those who were in the battlefield understood that this was the real Shura's land. This was a battlefield where there was no escape and no retreat. This was a group of warriors who were fearless of life and death and were close to madness. The battle between pirates was chaotic. They had no neat formation, no unified command, no forbidden means, and even no basic mercy. But in this chaos, there was a hint of delicacy and magnificence. Every round, every move, the confrontation between people was like a dance on the edge of life and death. Every step of the dance was unpredictable and would never be repeated. When these dance steps were gathered together, it became an unparalleled performance, interpreting a poem made of blood and power that belonged to the men of the sea. I say, Snow held the western sword in his hand. As he dealt with the enemies around him, he said to Fong Bujua, who was not far away, "Can you be a little more serious and come help me?" Huh? On Fong Bujua's side, he held a kitchen knife in his hand and was doing the same thing as Snow. "Is that necessary?" He glanced at Snow and replied, "From how I see it, you're fighting with more ease than I thought. I do have the energy to talk to you, and I can maintain a steady tone," Snow replied immediately. "But this doesn't mean that I have any advantage in the battle." He did not wait for Brother Bujua to respond. After pausing for a second, he hurriedly added, "To be honest, according to my estimation, this man in front of me can at most attack for another 10 moves or so, and then I won't be able to resist." "I see." Fong Bujua heard this and smiled. "Sai, there's really no other way. After saying this, he swayed his body and exposed a flaw. The pirate who was fighting with him saw an opportunity and took half a step forward to slash down with his knife. This slash was definitely not ordinary. The curved blade of the sailor's machete actually burst out with a sparkling blue light. This was obviously a skill-level attack. Of course, Fong Bujue was already prepared. He wanted to use a skill to solve the battle in front of him, so he used a trick to lure the enemy. In that split second, Brother Ju used his indescribable weird body movement. With a movement that ordinary people would not think of, he stabbed his opponent with his knife. At the same time, he used the unarmed hand that his opponent thought could not be used to defend to activate the telepathic finger, and firmly caught the blade of the enemy's knife. As soon as he used this strange attack, the outcome of the battle was decided. After Brother Ju withdrew the blood-stained kitchen knife, the pirate who was fighting with him first widened his eyes and looked down at the wound on his chest. Then, he slumped to the ground. When he stopped breathing, the fighting spirit in his eyes had not dissipated. At the moment of death, what flashed in front of his eyes was the lantern of his past life, or darkness and coldness. Were the bells of heaven ringing in his ears, or the howls of hell? Were his unrealized dreams in his heart, or the relief of having no regrets? All of this, no one would know, and no one would mention it again. The life of a nameless pirate was not romantic, nor was it sad. They were like fish and shrimp in the sea. Even if they occasionally jumped out of the water, they might not be seen. Even if they were seen, no one would remember them. Romance and sadness only belonged to the strong, to the king of the pirates. Even if they were extremely evil, they would be happy to be praised for eternity. I'm coming. After dealing with the enemy who was fighting with him, Fong Bujue turned around and rushed toward Snow. When he approached, he shouted to inform the other party that he was about to make a move. Seeing this, the pirate who was fighting with Snow naturally could not ignore it. As a pirate under Mad Eye, his ability was not much different from Blackbeard's pirates. To put it more bluntly, he was very strong. Seeing that the two players were about to work together to finish him off, this guy used his trump card. He suddenly straightened his body, placed the knife on his waist, and pointed the blade outwards. Then his whole body started to spin like a top, and he closed in on Snow at a very fast speed. TSK. Snow saw that things were not going his way, and his expression tensed as he quickly retreated. All the NPCs in this scenario know how to use skills, right? And this guy seems to have used a big one. Fong Bujue, who was charging at him, had to stop to avoid running into the enemy's blade. Speaking of which, I feel like I've seen this skill somewhere before. Could it be the legendary Max spinning knife wheel? Ding, ding, dang, dang. Just as Brother Ju was complaining, Snow had been forced to the edge of the deck. In a situation where he could not retreat, he could only use the Western Sword in his hand to activate the 7-star Radiant Sword to block the opponent's spinning knife wheel. For a time, the ultra-fast Western Sword and the chainsaw-like blade wheel made a series of rapid metal clangs, and there was a burst of sharp sparks in the air. That kind of thing is fine no matter what. Snow finally lost his cool. Before the skill was used, he shouted, "Hurry up and think of something." Something. Fong Bujue mumbled half a sentence. Just as Snow's skill was used up and he was about to jump off the ship, Brother Ju finally made his move. Chi. Who? Suddenly, there was a flash of red. Fong Bujue instantly activated Body Enhancement spell, modified, and with a speed that was beyond Snow's dynamic vision, he grabbed the latter's shoulder. A second later, with the sound of clothes rustling in the wind, the two figures suddenly appeared 7 or 8 meters away from the pirate. Snow, who was teleported by Fong Bujue, was first stunned by the change of scenery in front of him. Then, he reacted and looked at Brother Ju. Sandstorm Transit? Kid, you've done a thorough research on me. Fong Bujue raised his voice and replied, "You even remembered the name of my skill. You must have watched a lot of videos of my matches, right?" In the time it took to say these two sentences, the pirate who had just released the knife had stopped spinning and reorganized his stance. Then, he charged toward the two of them. Not only that, due to the change of position, Fong Bujue, and Snow entered the attack range of the other three crazy-eyed pirates. At this moment, the other three took advantage of the situation and surrounded them. Just like this, the situation that had just been alleviated took a turn for the worse in an instant. This is not good. At this moment, Fong Bujue thought to himself, there are too many allies around. If I use Rankyaku, there will definitely be accidental injuries. If I were alone, it would be fine. There are many ways to deal with it. But now that there's an extra burden, things will be... Thinking of this, he had a bad idea. How about I just puff, 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 just as Brother Jew was planning to betray his teammate. Suddenly, 4 arrows of light flew out from below the deck and pierced through the thick deck like piercing through paper windows. Then they accurately drilled into the anus of the 4 crazy-eyed pirates. The back of their bodies. Half a second later, 4 greenish-white rays of light pierced through the top of the heads of the 4 pirates. 4 blood flowers made of brain matter and fresh blood bloomed on top of their heads. You came at the right time. Fong Bujue did not need to think to know who shot these 4 arrows. Sure enough, 2 seconds later, Hong Hu, who was dressed in white, used some kind of light beam attack to cut open a piece of the deck and leaped out from the cabin below. Are you kidding me? After Hong Hu stood still, he quickly looked around and said in a grumbling tone, still not settled? As he spoke, he fixed his gaze on Brother Jew. You're just slacking off? Anyway, we'll win even if we don't do anything. Fong Bujue shrugged and replied, isn't it good to conserve some stamina and spiritual power? Your identity has been exposed. Why are you still pretending to be a big shot? Hong Hu used one hand to push up his glasses. Without waiting for Brother Jew to say anything, he continued, anyway, I'll cover for Brother Snow. You should hurry up and move around. At this point, he suddenly pulled the bow in his hand and shot a blind arrow to the side behind him without looking back. The arrow of light flashed. Then, 3 meters behind Hong Hu, an invisible pirate suddenly appeared. The pirate was obviously still in a state of confusion. Suddenly, he dropped the knife in his hand with a look of disbelief. He raised both his hands and covered the bloody hole on his neck that was pierced by the arrow of light. He maintained this posture. Then, he fell face down on the deck. The difficulty of this scenario is higher than we thought, and I have some unexpected discoveries. Hong Hu, who had completed the kill with the arrow, acted as if nothing had happened. He continued what he said earlier. We'd better be careful so that we don't go overboard. Chapter 1301. Since you said so. Fong Bujue thought for a few seconds, then said to Hong Hu with a sly expression, then I'll reluctantly be a little serious. For some reason, when Hong Hu saw Fong Bujue's annoying look, the following words appeared in his mind. This time it's settled. Brother Jew did not disappoint his teammates. Before he finished speaking, his figure had already moved. After activating the body enhancement spell, modified, Fong Bujue's figure suddenly turned into a red light. He rampaged on the deck, shuttling back and forth. No one could stop him. Everywhere he passed, there was a bloody mist, and heads flew. The battle that was originally considered to be evenly matched under the power of Fong Bujue alone became a crushing defeat. Although this is an unexpected development, it seems to be a good thing. Blackbeard, who was standing on a high ground, looked at all of this with a smile at this time. On the other side, Mad Eye's reaction was completely opposite to Blackbeard's. Damn it, what is that? Who is that? Mad Eye was shocked by this sudden change. He yelled as he grabbed one of the crew members next to him and yelled at him fiercely. I don't know. The crew member was completely at a loss. Mad Eye was so angry that he ground his teeth, but he still did not lose his mind. So, after a little suppression of his emotions, he let go of the crew member and said, quickly go and ask the master to come out. Tell him, if he doesn't come out, we will all be wiped out. Yes. The crew member scrambled to respond, turned around, and ran towards the cabin. Just as the minions staggered away, suddenly, there was another change. In the blink of an eye, the red light flashed, and a figure appeared. In a blink of an eye, Fong Bujue, who was still on the deck collecting heads, was in front of Mad Eye, waving his sword. Oomph! You overestimate yourself. Facing this surprise attack, Mad Eye did not show any fear or panic. The reason was simple. As a pirate captain who could compete with Blackbeard, Blackbeard's battle prowess was outstanding. Even Brother Jew, who had activated his skills, could not escape from Blackbeard's dynamic vision. Ha! In the next second, there was the sound of a palm strike. Madman I had used empty-handed blade block on Brother Jew, and he had succeeded. What the F*** CK? Now that there were no teammates around, Fong Bujue couldn't help but curse. You're really something. Kid. Madman I did not answer Brother Jew, but asked himself, this blade was made for you by the Count of Script? Oh. Fong Bujue was a little surprised that the other party was able to recognize the origins of the kitchen knife at a glance. You can even tell that. Huh. Mad Eye laughed dryly and shouted, that old bastard's enchantment seal. I can recognize it, even from dozens of meters away. As his voice grew louder and louder, a sudden attack came at him. Since Mad Eye's palms were clamping down on blade block, Fong Bujue could not pull the knife back. In a moment of desperation, Brother Jew could only let go of the weapon in his hand and turn around to dodge. This way, even though Mad Eye's kick missed, he had successfully taken away Brother Jew's weapon. Looks like, before Fong Bujue stood still, he had already come to a conclusion. Long before I got close to you, you already knew the characteristics of this knife. At this moment, Brother Jew realized that Mad Eye was trying to avoid the special effect of blade block, so he chose to use empty-handed blade block to block the attack, and he had planned to take the knife from the beginning. Of course, Mad Eye nimbly grabbed the kitchen knife and held the handle. You killed so many of my men in front of me. If I can't even see that. Halfway through his words, he suddenly did something that surprised Brother Jew. Mad Eye held the kitchen knife horizontally, clamped it with both hands, and twisted it with force. Immediately after, a ping sound came from the blade, and the perfect grade equipment was broken just like that. After spending 2 seconds to complete the action of breaking the knife, Mad Eye finished the second half of his sentence. Then am I still Mad Eye? And Fong Bujue, who stood 3 meters away from him, was stunned for 2 seconds, which was very rare of him. After 2 seconds, Brother Jew seemed to have realized something. He narrowed his eyes, put on a ruffian face, and said with a smile and an angry tone, you actually dismantled my equipment? At the same time, in a cabin of the Queen Anna's Revenge. The hunchback man called Ken looked at the wall and said with a smile, Mad Eye, that guy, did something irreversible, On the other hand, Mad Eye still didn't know what he had done. He was still provoking Brother Jew. Dismantling your knife is nothing. I still want to take your life. Stop wasting time. Fong Bujue yelled. What is the use of living? His subtle words made Mad Eye's brain a little confused. The latter thought he heard wrong. Are you out of your mind? Mad Eye didn't dwell on it. He quickly pulled out the sword at his waist and was ready to kill. Oh, well, since you think your life is not worth as much as a knife, then I'll send you on your way as soon as possible. Then, he raised the sword and slashed, the tip of the blade going straight for Brother Jew's neck. Seeing that, Fong Bujue did not hesitate. He raised his hand and used 2 of his fingers to clamp down on the man's blade. Oh, Mad Eye had thought that the man before him was just a speed-type fighter who relied on the Count of Script's weapon to kill. He did not expect the man to be able to catch his attack with just his fingers when he was unarmed. Although Madman Eye's sword was just a casual swing and not a skill, he was still a boss character. His basic strength was quite strong. If it were a normal pirate minion, let alone using a finger to defend, even if they used a weapon to block the sword, they would still be pushed back a few meters. Therefore, Brother Jew's telepathic finger really surprised Mad Eye. Looks like you're stronger than I thought. However, this level of surprise was not enough to scare Mad Eye. Before I kill you, I'll ask for your name. Mad. When he uttered the first word, Fong Bujue let go of the blade and took a large step back. No. When he said the second word, he put his 2 fingers together and pierced them into the area below his ribs. Jew. The third word was roared out, and with the roar came the blood from his wound. When he heard that name, Mad Eye's expression changed. Obviously, he had heard the name Fong Bujua before, and he had heard it many times. So that's how it is. After several seconds, Mad Eye said darkly, "If you're not pretending to be him, then you really are." At that moment, he really could not understand why Brother Jew would harm himself, so he could only use the word mad to explain it. "You like to dismantle equipment, don't you?" Fong Bujua ignored Mad Eye. He glared at the man with murderous eyes and raised his bloodied hand high. Then, together with the god of probability, "I'll give you one more chance." As he spoke, the blood that flowed out from his wound gathered and gathered in his hand to form the shape of a weapon. Seeing this, everyone understood. Fong Bujua stabbed himself to activate the Book of Greed. After paying 1 pint of blood and 35% of maximum stamina points and sorcery points, he could summon a perfect weapon from the void. I don't know if it's because he used his blood, but this time, the god of probability gave him a lot of face name. Demon Sword, Yama item type, weapon quality, legendary offense points, attribute / special effect. The user's sorcery skills have no cooldown under appropriate conditions, and the cost is reduced to 1/4 of the original. Equipment requirement. The weapon is summoned by the Book of Greed. Duration, 1:39 remark. The supreme artifact of the Kingdom of Death, the magic weapon that can activate Doomsday Punishment. This sword was purplish red, and the blade was like a wing. The blade was inlaid with countless gems and silver. When the demon sword, Yama, appeared in Fong Bujua's hand, the originally clear sky suddenly changed color. For a moment, dark clouds covered the sun and the moon. Even the wind on the sea quietly stopped at this moment. "What is this?" Mad Eye knew his stuff, so he was shocked when he saw the sword. In fact, Blackbeard, who was far away at the stern of the other ship, also had a serious look on his face. The situation in front of him was like two armies from the era of cold weapons were fighting, but suddenly a Gundam appeared on the battlefield. Good question. Although Mad Eye's sentence was not a question at all, Fong Bujua still answered loudly. "This is called the Demon's Sword." Before he finished his words, the sword had already landed. Even Fong Bujua himself did not expect that the result of this sword was 10 minutes later. The sky cleared up once again. At this time, the 3 players were standing in the captain's room of the Queen Anna's Revenge. It was not that the 3 of them wanted to stand, but the captain's room was not spacious. There was only 1 chair in total, and it was already occupied by Blackbeard. On the Chaos Sea, there are 3 pirate ships known as Legends. When Blackbeard said this, he sat comfortably on the chair. He did not feel the slightest bit uncomfortable with the situation where the guests could only stand. The first one is the Black Pearl. The second one is the Flying Dutchman. The third one is my Queen Anna's Revenge. At this point, he paused and said, "Other than these 3 ships, there are 11 ships that are second only to the Legends. They are called 11, let me guess." Snow shrugged and said, "The brown algae is one of the 11. Hearing this, Blackbeard exhaled a breath of air from his nose. Then, he turned his face and looked out through the porthole in the captain's room. Through the round window, he could just see the wreckage of the brown algae that had not completely sunk and had been broken into 2. It used to be, Blackbeard corrected the word, was in Snow's sentence, and took the opportunity to cast a resentful look at Brother Jew on the other side of the room. "What?" Fong Bujua was thick-skinned. He met Blackbeard's gaze without fear and replied in a matter-of-fact tone. "Are you blaming me? The glass bottles on the shelf behind you now contain the pirate ships that I conquered in the past." Blackbeard changed his way of answering Brother Jew's question. "To be more precise, they are the pirate ships that I think have collectible value." He raised his hand and pointed in that direction. I don't know if you noticed, but under the 2 bottles with the words Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman written on them, there are 2 rows, a total of 10 ships, and an empty space. Fong Bujua did not respond. He stood there and looked around, pretending not to hear what Blackbeard said. Meanwhile, Ambitionist and Snow were rolling their eyes awkwardly at the side. "Thanks to you." Blackbeard waited for 4 or 5 seconds. Seeing that the other party did not speak, he continued, I'm afraid that space will be empty forever. If I were you, Fong Bujua tilted his head and replied in a very casual tone, I would change to a new shelf. You really know how to chat, Blackbeard replied with a blank expression. It's okay. Fong Bujua replied, oh, right, since you're in a bad mood now, I'll tell you another piece of bad news. Your 3 barrels of withered leaf wine are gone. When this sentence came out, Hong Hu and Snow took a step back at the same time, distancing themselves from Brother Ju. They themselves could not explain why they did that. Probably, they were worried that Blackbeard would flip over from the other side of the table and chop them up. Ha! This time, Blackbeard was so angry that he started laughing. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said, I've only heard of the practice of announcing bad news when someone is in a good mood. This is the first time I've seen such a trick. That's right. People like me who are good at chatting have always tried to avoid ruining other people's moods when they're in a good mood. Fong Bujue's fearless attitude, his shameless wording, and his impeccable rogue logic were really enough to shake people's views and make them unable to react. Then I have to thank you? Even Blackbeard himself was surprised that he had not turned hostile. You're welcome. Fong Bujue continued to boast shamelessly. As the saying goes, great kindness cannot be thanked with words. People like me who are indifferent to fame and fortune, you can repay me with your actions. Blackbeard's hands were shaking, his shoulders were shaking, and even his body was shaking. But compared to the trembling in the depths of his heart, this was nothing. If it was in the past, he would have opened his mouth and cursed, Mother asterisk cur. Please understand the original English meaning of this word, and then rushed up to Brother Jew to tear him apart. But today, Blackbeard's reaction was so, what do you want? Chapter 1302. A cell. A dark cell. Mad Eye had been in countless cells, but the one on the Queen's Revenge was different. Otherwise, it would not have been able to contain someone like Mad Eye. Thump! Thump! Suddenly, there was a unique sound of footsteps. It pierced through the sound of the waves and went from soft to loud, from far to near, and into Mad Eye's ears. Mad Eye did not need to look to know that it was Blackbeard. Are you here to humiliate me? Mad Eye asked before Blackbeard could stand still. I have no right to humiliate you. In the next second, Blackbeard's figure walked out of the shadows and appeared under the dim light. Mad Eye looked up and glanced at Blackbeard. Through the bars of the cell, he saw a face with a complicated expression. Winner takes all, Mad Eye said. Victory, isn't that capital? Victory? Blackbeard repeated the word and sneered. What victory? What did I win? Mad Eye did not answer the question. Reputation? Blackbeard denied as he spoke. I'm already the overlord of the Sea of Chaos. What kind of reputation do I need? He paused. Wealth? He showed a disdainful expression. Your ship and everything on it have sunk into the sea. Even if it did not sink, the only thing on the ship that I'm interested in is the ship itself. As he said this, his smile became even wider. However, there was a hint of sarcasm in his smile. Let's take a step back and talk about it. I didn't even get the pleasure of killing and the sense of accomplishment. What's the point of such a victory? Then why did you come to me? Mad Eye asked. Are you going to let me out to fight you? Blackbeard laughed dryly and looked down at Mad Eye's right shoulder. At this moment, there was no arm below the shoulder. Let's wait until your arm grows back, Blackbeard said, shaking his head. What do you mean? You still want me to live? Mad Eye's expression changed slightly as he probed. Yes, Blackbeard replied calmly. This joke isn't funny. When Mad Eye said this, he wasn't laughing. When have you ever heard of? Blackbeard stopped smiling and looked at him condescendingly. Blackbeard would joke. Mad Eye was stunned. Then, he fell silent as he pondered. 10 seconds later, Mad Eye figured out. What do you want from me? Just answer a few of my questions, Blackbeard continued. Mad Eye's attitude was still very bad. I can't guarantee that I'll tell the truth. However, Blackbeard did not seem to care about this. He ignored the man's unappreciative reaction and asked directly, Is the Red Hoop still alive? The Red Hoop he mentioned was also a notorious pirate. As far as Blackbeard knew, the brown algae was the Red Hoop's ship, not Mad Eye's. I see. So that's what you want to ask. Mad Eye thought for a moment, then replied, He's dead. You killed him? Blackbeard asked, What are you doing? You want to avenge him? Mad Eye answered with a question. Not necessarily. Blackbeard gave an ambiguous answer and kicked the ball back to Mad Eye. Heh, Mad Eye sneered. Whatever. You're no match for him anyway. Him? Blackbeard's eyes sharpened. Is it this him you're talking about? Who killed the Red Hoop? That's right, Mad Eye replied. There is no need for me to hide this from you. After all, many people have seen it. It won't take long for the news to spread throughout the entire sea of chaos. He paused for a second and recalled. About 2 days ago, I was drinking with a few of my men at the tavern on Boiling Island. The Red Ring was there as well. At dusk he came. He was wearing a monk's robe, and he looked like an invisible ghost. The moment he walked into the tavern, the seasons seemed to have changed. It was winter. At this point, Mad Eye gulped. After he entered the tavern, he went straight to Red Hoop and said something in a volume that only the two of them could hear. I don't know the details of the conversation, but I do know that Red Hoop flew into a rage and was about to kill him in the tavern. But the one who died in the end was the Red Hoop himself. Blackbeard asked. Mad Eye nodded slightly and continued. I've never met someone like that. If he can still be considered a person. He shrugged. Based on my judgment, his power was at least at the same level as the demon sword Yama that Feng Bujua took out earlier, or perhaps even stronger. So, when he destroyed the Red Hoop and walked to me to ask if I was interested in becoming the captain of the brown algae, I answered yes. You're trying to say, Blackbeard continued. You led the pirates to attack me, but it was actually he who ordered it. Huh. Ha ha. When that was said, Mad Eye guffawed. Stop flattering yourself, Blackbeard. In his eyes, you and I are just small characters. It was pure coincidence that I ran into you today, and attacking you was my idea. He merely agreed to it after I suggested it. Then what was his original purpose? Blackbeard asked. And where is he now? TSK. I'm the one who wants to know that, Mad Eye grumbled. Just before the attack, the man suddenly found an excuse to run into the cabin, and I haven't seen him since. As for his purpose, do you think he will tell me? The only thing I know is that the place he wants to go is Devil's Maw Island. When the name Devil's Maw Island was mentioned, Blackbeard fell into contemplation. Blackbeard took a moment to arrange his thoughts before he spoke again. One last question. He paused for half a second before asking, What was the cannon that you fired at the beginning? Huh? Mad Eye was obviously startled, and it took him a few seconds to recover. Oh, you're talking about that. That cannon was something that he created out of thin air not long before he fired it. According to him, it was an ambush that he had planted for the sake of insurance. He shrugged. But other than the fact that it flew very far, I couldn't tell what was so special about that thing. Oomph. Blackbeard heard this and sneered. So, it's like that. Listening to your tone, Matt, I noticed something. What's the problem with that cannon? Of course there's a problem, and the problem is very serious. Blackbeard replied. Half an hour ago, I asked my first mate to go to the bottom of the sea to check on the cannon. His face was gloomy. As a result, he hasn't come back yet. Chapter 1303. Many years ago, Erdini was also a pirate captain. He was cold, reticent, and merciless. He killed and robbed, and he committed all kinds of crimes. The pirate ship he commanded, the Ice Pick, was also one of the 11, and was famous on the Sea of Chaos. And now, Erdini had become Blackbeard's first mate, and he was the latter's most loyal subordinate. His battleship had long been sealed in a glass bottle, quietly sleeping on the shelf in the captain's room of the Queen Anna's Revenge. During this period, I will not go into too much detail about what happened. Even if I use very serious and even tragic words, coupled with an epic plot to tell you how Erdini surrendered to Blackbeard's power and the power of a king, it will be useless. Because, no matter what, you will eventually think that there is some kind of unspeakable deal behind this. So, I have decided to give up on this meaningless and futile attempt. I will accommodate you, the readers who are already beyond redemption and are not ashamed of it. Let's continue with the story. Just as Blackbeard was talking to Mad Eye in the dungeon, the three players had returned to the deck. Not long ago, Fong Bujue had reached an agreement with Blackbeard in the captain's room. Simply put, cooperation. Blackbeard would try his best to cooperate with the players to complete the mission without harming his own interests, and the players would help Blackbeard as much as they could. This was obviously a win-win agreement. At least so far, the missions received by the players haven't shown any conflict with Blackbeard. Since they were going to act together with the pirates, it was natural for them to contribute a little. Wow, looks like this scenario is very complicated. At this time, Fong Bujue and Snow had just finished listening to Hong Hu's narration. Brother Ju rubbed his chin and said, "According to what you said, the mysterious Ken actually discovered our identity before Blackbeard, and his position and purpose are very suspicious. I say, you are acting again, aren't you?" Hearing that, Snow glanced at Brother Ju from the corner of his eyes and said in a strange tone, "If there is that kind of special NPC on the ship, you should be able to sense it, right?" Even though Snow did not say it out loud, but based on this sentence, it was enough to see that he had already speculated that Brother Ju could see through data to a certain extent through his research on Fong Bujue. I could detect it. Fong Bujue did not point this out. He just replied in a weak tone, "The problem is the NPCs on this ship are basically the special NPCs that you mentioned. From how I see it, none of them are to be trifled with. If there is one, or even a few, who are especially strong, who purposely hide their strength and blend into this group of people, then even I would have a hard time identifying them." Snow could not find a flaw in this statement, so he could only say, "Okay, I have to admit, the NPCs in this scenario are indeed a bit too strong. Some of the soldiers are even as strong as some of the scenario bosses that I have encountered before." Before he finished, Fong Bujue and Hong, who both turned their heads to look at each other. Then, Brother Ju chose to shrug. Ambitionist cleared his throat and said to Snow, "Snow, I don't know if I should say this." He paused and said, "This character of yours, you must have used a very short period of time to level up quickly, right?" "Yes." Snow seemed to think that there was nothing wrong with saying this, so he admitted honestly, "I created this character on the 1st of December. From the very beginning, I activated the double EXP buff card and hired the team from Regulation to run the dungeons with me. I made good use of my gaming time every day. Coincidentally, I was just in time for the launch of a new version, and there were various activities and EXP rewards, so in just 20 days, I rushed to level 40. Sigh, that is where the problem lies." Ambitionist adjusted his glasses and sighed. In a game like Thriller Paradise, level is not that important. A method like yours will only lead to a series of negative chain reactions. First, your skill points will definitely not be enough, and that means you will not be able to purchase the equipment and skills inside the Thriller box. Second, even if you can spend money to buy the expensive items at the auction house or rely on the players to help you level up in the scenario, you will still face the problem of insufficient mastery level, and you will not be able to meet the requirements to use the items. Ambitionist sighed. Before he could finish his words, Snow interrupted. "Brother Swan, I know all about them." He smiled embarrassedly. "Huh, it's just that I seem to have found out a little too late." Snow pursed his lips and continued. "The morning before yesterday, I reached level 40, and then I started to queue for the dungeon alone, because the highest level the studio can take is level 40. He paused before continuing. "And the feeling I got from queuing alone for the past 2 days is this. In terms of combat, the players around me are 1 or 2 levels stronger than me, and the professional players are even more so. Thankfully, I can be considered a player with a brain, so I can still be of some use in the team. With regards to the problem of mastery level that you mentioned, at this stage, I believe I can only spend some time to train myself." At this point, he changed the topic. "But when I said that the NPCs in this scenario are impossibly strong, I was not judging them from the perspective of my own weakness. I think the combat ability of the small fries in this scenario is far higher than the average level of a normal player team, and that is why I said that." Is that so? Brother Jew, who had been looking around, suddenly chimed in. How come I don't think it's that bad? Me too. Hong, who was about to agree with Brother Jew, but he suddenly swallowed that thought. Wait a minute. Think about it carefully. Snow is the one who is right. He turned to look at Feng Bujue. Actually, it is the two of us who are not objective enough. Ha! In other words, the two of us are now too strong, right? Brother Jew instantly put on that annoying face and said a line that sounded arrogant, but was also the truth. Unfortunately, his smug good mood didn't last for long. In just 2 seconds, on the surface of the sea, there was a sudden change. Bang! There was the sound of water breaking, and there was an explosion. Following this loud explosion, a shadow shot out from the surface of the sea and flew into the air. Then, he fell toward the deck of the Queen's Revenge. At that time, the Queen's Revenge was in a half-birth state. Since Adini had not returned to the ship, after the battle, Blackbeard ordered the sailors to put away the sails and stop the ship at this part of the sea to wait. However, no one expected that the captain's order to stop the ship would go against Adini's will. Chapter 1304. Back to half an hour ago. Even though the weather above the sea was fine and sunny, under the surface of the sea, if one were to dive a little deeper, the surroundings would become pitch black. However, this was not a problem for Erdini. Erdini had many abilities that were very suitable for underwater operations, and one of them was night vision. According to him, he had been repeatedly tortured by horse urine, a cruel punishment that did not leave any wounds, but could cause blindness. The specific method was to put fresh horse urine into a sealed bucket, roast it over a fire, and then press the person's head into the bucket until the urine evaporated. However, the result was that not only did he not go blind, he could also see through various kinds of murky liquid. In addition, Erdini also had the ability to breathe underwater. According to him, he had also been subjected to water torture, a form of torture by making the person feel as if they were about to drown. After many years of research and development, there had been many improvements and variations. Buddha's face with golden paper was one of them. The simplest and most traditional method was to repeatedly press a person's head into the water and pull him up when he was about to suffocate. This cycle would continue until the executioner achieved his goal. However, in the end, he didn't even make a fart. Furthermore, his lungs had mutated and gills had grown out of his chin. There were many legends like this, but their authenticity could not be verified. Perhaps Erdini was born with these abilities, and he had just made up stories of torture to build his image as a tough guy. Or perhaps he was telling the truth. This meant that Erdini's real ability was to induce changes in his body under extreme pain to adapt to a harsh environment. In any case, as Blackbeard's right-hand man, Erdini's ability was definitely not weak. If one were to compare him, he should be about the same level as a mid-level time officer. It was also because of his confidence in Erdini's ability and special abilities that Blackbeard had sent him into the sea to investigate. Erdini did not let Blackbeard down. After he jumped off the ship, he swam like a torpedo towards the sea where the cannonball had fallen. It didn't take long before he found the cannonball created by the master that was still sinking in the sea. Since Erdini had been ordered to investigate the object, he had to come into contact with it. So, after confirming his target, he swam over cautiously with all his might. However, at this moment, he did not know that the thing in front of him was not something that could be dealt with by relying on caution. 10 seconds later, Erdini was already close to the artillery shell. His swimming speed gradually slowed down. Through the seawater, Erdini saw a metallic sphere that glowed with a faint silver light. He observed it for a few seconds and thought to himself, "Captain, you were right to be worried. This thing is no ordinary artillery shell. It looks like some kind of magic tool. If we leave it alone, it might trigger something that is not in our favor." Erdini had some experience dealing with such items. Generally speaking, as long as one did not touch it directly, it would not trigger any effects. Thinking of this, Erdini took off his shirt and prepared to wrap the item up and take it away. Unexpectedly, just as he stretched out his hand, before he could even touch the sphere, something terrible happened. The silver metal sphere suddenly exploded and turned into a pool of mercury-like substance with an irregular shape. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded to the size of Erdini's entire body. Seeing this, Erdini's reaction was swift. Almost at the same time as the explosion, he had already turned around and retreated. Unfortunately, he was too close to the sphere and could not escape in time. Soon, the thick liquid metal wrapped around Erdini and entered his eyes, mouth, nose, and ears. Time returned to the present. Bang! A figure fell to the ground, and the deck crumbled. The figure that appeared in front of everyone was the first mate of the Queen Anna's revenge, Erdini. But at this moment, he looked very strange. His eyes had lost their pupils, and his eye sockets were filled with a mass of silver. On his body, there were no clothes, and 80% of his body was covered with a silver metal-like substance. The most shocking thing was that there was a strange, murderous aura emanating from his body. It was as if it was real, and it forced the pirates on the deck to retreat. Mr. Erdini, what happened to you? A sailor who had a good relationship with Erdini took a few steps forward and asked tentatively, "Don't go over there. Idiot. That's not." An old sailor who was standing near him scolded and wanted to call him back. But it was too late. At that moment, Erdini attacked without warning and punched through the sailor's chest. The latter's face was filled with horror, and he died with his eyes wide open. Huh! Erdini, or rather, the parasite that had taken control of Erdini's body, revealed a sinister smile. This kind of smile was not unfamiliar to Fong Bujue and most of the people on the ship. They knew very well that this was an expression that would only appear when one had obtained joy and satisfaction from killing. Be careful. 3 seconds later, Hong, who was the first to react, and shouted, "This guy's going to start a massacre." As an outsider who did not know Erdini, Hong Hu quickly made an accurate judgment without any emotion. As he shouted, he summoned his weapon. In the blink of an eye, there was a whoosh and a light arrow flew towards Erdini's face. Ping! Then, in less than half a second, with a crisp sound, Erdini used his hand that was covered with silver liquid and firmly grasped the light arrow that Hong Hu had shot. His speed and reaction are ridiculously fast, and he can even grab pure energy attacks with his bare hands. Seeing this, Snow's expression was solemn. This guy is not easy to deal with. Hong Hu chuckled and said, "I knew that he could grab energy before I made my move." Before he could finish his sentence, a strange, ear-piercing sound rang out from afar. It turned out that the arrow that Hong Hu had just shot had a hidden move. In an instant, the light arrow had exploded in Erdini's hand and turned into a light array, enveloping the latter in it. After Erdini was trapped in the array, there was a flash of doubt in his eyes, but he did not show any panic. He thought for a few seconds, then raised his arm and punched the light wall in front of him. Duong. A violent shock reverberated in the spherical light array, shaking Erdini a few times, but he did not seem to have suffered any damage. As for the light formation itself, cracks had already appeared on it after just one strike. "Oh, he has armament hockey all over his body, right?" Fong Bujue saw this and said, "I have to take care of this." While talking, Brother Ju was already rolling up his sleeves, eager to give it a try. Earlier, Fong Bujue still felt apologetic toward Blackbeard when he cut down the brown algae, because he understood the feeling of missing one piece of a collectible set. Now that there was a chance for him to contribute to the pirate crew, naturally, Brother Ju would not hesitate to do it. But just as he was about to rush out, dong, dong, the familiar and peculiar footsteps rang out again. Then, Blackbeard slowly walked out a cabin that led to the lower deck. "So noisy. I thought something was wrong," Blackbeard said as he walked straight towards Erdini. "It turns out that my first mate is back." At this time, Erdini also used a wave of continuous attacks to break the barrier created by Hong Hu. At this moment, after the fierce battle, on the deck where the blood has not dissipated, the number 1 and number 2 figures of the Blackbeard pirates have formed a confrontation. "Oh, this is going to be a good show." Fong Bujue, who wanted to do it himself, suddenly completely restrained his fighting spirit and put on a look of an onlooker. Indeed, even Hong, who put away his bow and said softly, "So far, we haven't seen Blackbeard's actual performance in battle. Take this opportunity to observe." While the two players were talking, on the other side, Erdini had already opened his mouth and said, "I am not your first mate." There was a slight change in his voice. It sounded as if the original Erdini had dropped a handful of thumbtacks into his throat. "Then who are you?" Blackbeard asked coldly. "No one." The other replied, "Of course, I don't mind using the name of the original owner of this body." "Understood." When Blackbeard read out these 3 words, he spoke very slowly, and a trace of imperceptible disappointment flashed across his eyes. "What you're saying is my first mate, he's not coming back, right?" "Ha ha!" The parasite laughed. He did not answer Blackbeard's question because the answer was obvious. Sure enough, this man is a very important person on this ship, right? When I was devouring him, I felt it. This guy's willpower was so strong that it surprised me. I spent a long time torturing him in the spiritual domain, but I still couldn't make his willpower yield. Out of desperation, I could only destroy his brain to a certain extent on a physical level. That was how I managed to seize control of this body. "That's right," Lin Sanju said with a smile. "That's right." He paused and looked around. Now that I think about it, he was willing to endure the immense pain and fight until the last moment. He must have wanted to buy time for all of you on this ship. He hoped that you would leave before he came back. That way, you wouldn't have to face me. At this point, he laughed proudly. How ironic. In fact, if he didn't come close to me, I would have just become a parasite on some sea creature and turned into a sea monster to attack all of you. But the upper limit of that body, compared to this first mate, it's like heaven and earth. He shrugged. "I have to say, your luck isn't too good." His words had successfully angered the surrounding pirates. It was obvious that Erdini was highly respected on this ship. Even if to the average person, he was a terrifying villain, in the eyes of the pirates, he was a villain worthy of their respect. The 3 values and friendship of the pirates were very strange and could not be explained in a few words. They were after wealth, but they were not only after wealth. They respected power, but sometimes they refused to submit to it. They would curse at each other, fight, and even kill each other. But this did not change the fact that they were brothers with each other. It was from this group of people that Erdini had earned his respect. Before he died, he had also sacrificed his last drop of blood for this crude, sinful, and inexplicable, yet difficult to sever fetters. Even a Blackbeard, he was worthy of being called important. Luck? After listening to the parasite's story, Blackbeard was silent for a few seconds before he replied, "No, this has nothing to do with luck. I was the one who asked him to go down to the sea to investigate. I did not have enough information. I did not think things through, and that led to the death of my subordinate." When Blackbeard said those words, his tone was very calm. As he spoke, he even took a few steps forward and arrived beside a wooden barrel. He casually grabbed a bottle of rum that was placed on top of the barrel cover. It was unknown who had drunk half of it. "I'm very sorry that Erdini left us." What he said next was more for the crew. "He is my most capable subordinate. He is more useful than any of you lazy bums. He is also the purest tough guy I know. He is one of the few real men left in the chaotic ocean. He is 100 times better than those sissies who are outwardly strong but inwardly weak. And he has saved my life more than once." At this point, Blackbeard lowered his eyes and paused for a few seconds. Then he raised the bottle of rum in his hand and continued, "To Erdini, loyal friend, terrible speaker, and a villain who upholds the spirit of the old school pirates." Then, in a silent and solemn atmosphere, he poured a glass of rum onto the deck. Then, he picked up the bottle and gulped down a few mouthfuls. After that, as if venting his anger, Blackbeard suddenly threw the bottle at the parasite's face. The parasite didn't dodge. It wasn't because it couldn't dodge, but because the flying bottle couldn't do any damage to it. Asterisk, ring, ring, ring. Asterisk amidst the sound of glass shattering. Blackbeard turned around once again and walked toward the cabin. Unlike what Feng Bujue and the others had predicted, Blackbeard did not choose to do it himself. After he was done, before he left the deck, he casually said, "Kill him." Chapter 1305. This parasite was obviously a very strong monster. As a biological weapon, it had two forms. One was the original form of a metal sphere, and the other was the combat form that evolved according to the body of the parasite. In its original form, the parasite had an excellent erosion ability. With this ability, it could parasitize the body of most creatures. Even a Dini, who was at the level of a time officer, would not be able to resist. Of course, this did not mean that the parasite's ability would be effective against a real-time officer. For the parasite to succeed in its erosion, there were prerequisites. If the parasite's spirit and body had reached a certain level of strength, or if the parasite had a special attribute, the erosion would fail. For example, if Samontier encountered a parasite, nothing would happen to him. Spiritually, he had the power of faith of the Phantom Fiend Church as his backing. Physically, he was a satyr who relied on the power of corrosion. He would be lucky if he did not infect others. Who could infect him? Unfortunately, Edini was a human and did not have any special attributes. His spirit and body were not strong enough to withstand the erosion. At most, he could only buy some time. Therefore, after more than half an hour, the parasite finally destroyed the host's consciousness and successfully took over the host's body, entering the combat form. In the combat form, the parasite had more abilities. First, it could replace all the body fluids and internal organs of the parasite with its own body, a kind of silver, semi-solidified substance. This way, the body would be immune to pain and have a certain degree of self-healing ability. Secondly, it would modify the host's brain so that they would be completely immune to mind control abilities. Third, it could catalyze the host's body to achieve the goal of proliferation or mutation, changing the host's body shape and greatly increasing the host's combat ability on the physical level. In short, the current Erdini, or rather, the parasite that had taken over Erdini's body. Other than intelligence, willpower, and experience, its combat prowess was undoubtedly higher than the original Erdini's. A monster like this, even on the Queen Anna's revenge, could kill a lot of people. But, even so, Blackbeard did not plan to attack. Of course, he was not afraid. It wasn't to hide his strength either. In fact, Blackbeard really wanted to tear this monster, who killed his confidant, into pieces with his own hands. Only by doing so would he be able to calm down the guilt and anger in his heart. However, he held himself back, because he knew that at this time, at this place, letting the crew deal with this guy was the most appropriate choice. Compared to his anger, the anger of the people on the ship was more urgent. Moreover, as the overlord of the chaotic ocean, the captain of the Queen Anna's revenge, and the legendary pirate, he would not and could not easily make a move. An opponent who could make Blackbeard face his sword must also have a certain level of qualification. For example, Feng Bujue could do it. The Four Pillar Gods could also do it. As for the Mad Eye, he could make do with it. However, a weapon created by someone else like a parasite, a rude monster, definitely did not have the right to do so. Avenge first mate. Roar, chop him into pieces. Things developed as Blackbeard expected. After listening to his eulogy and the words, "kill him," the morale of the pirates instantly skyrocketed. The anger of revenge was burning, and roars full of murderous intent came one after another. Under the leadership of a group of cadres, the crew swarmed up and launched a siege on the parasite. At this moment, the Blackbeard pirates were more terrifying than the previous battle with the Mad Eye's troops. The parasite also clearly felt that the momentum of the people around it was different from when it boarded the ship. And this amazing change made the parasite feel fear. This emotion was still very strange to the parasite, but it quickly suppressed its innate desire to kill and made it have a very rational and correct idea: escape. As a biological weapon, the parasite did not have the determination to fight to the death, nor did it have any beliefs or hatred. Therefore, when it lost the motivation of bloodlust, Even if it still had the combat strength to fight to the death and perish together with some of the enemies, he would not put it into action. Just as the parasite hurriedly turned around and was ready to jump into the sea to escape. Suddenly, there was a rush of wind. That was the movement of the ropes on the Queen Anna's Revenge. No one controlled those ropes, and no one even touched them. The ship seemed to have its own will. It stretched out her hand and firmly grabbed the enemy, who was ready to escape. Cough, cough, a dash, the parasite was entangled by the rope and pulled into a big shape in midair. It squeezed out a few struggling groans from its throat, but the rope wrapped around its neck immediately suppressed the sound. The parasitic body that could easily break through the light matrix released by the swan was actually unable to move because of these ropes. Clearly, this legendary pirate ship itself contained some kind of powerful force. Seeing this scene, Hong-Hu and Snow both felt a little scared. Just imagine if Blackbeard turned against them, if they stood in the opposite position of the pirates. Maybe death would come more suddenly and fatally than they thought. The battle didn't last long. Perhaps this wasn't a battle. It was more accurate to call it a punishment. The previous words and deeds of the parasite had attracted enough hatred for it. Anyone who saw its death could confirm that it was absolutely impossible for it to heal itself. In a sense, its self-healing ability became a burden in the process of being killed. 10 minutes later, just when the crew was almost done venting, Blackbeard appeared on the deck again. He didn't say much, just glanced at the silver substance all over the ground, then issued an order to restart in 20 minutes and return to the captain's room. After the captain entered the room, except for some younger crew members who still needed to stay to repair and wash the deck, the other pirates dispersed. At this time, Fong Bujua thought of an idea and said to the two teammates next to him, "Let's help wash the deck." Ambitionist and Snow both understood that this fellow must be up to something again. The two of them asked in a questioning tone at the same time, "What are you trying to do?" "Oh." Fong Bujua saw this and chuckled. "I just want to collect some samples while it's still hot." Chapter 1306. With Brother Jew's suggestion, the three players picked up a mop and a brush and pretended to help the sailors clean the deck. During the cleaning process, they each went to collect some pieces of the parasite. Fong Bujua had a plan. When he saw the parasite, he knew that it was related to the anomalies, so he planned to bring some samples back. When he had the chance, he would give them to his anomalies to identify. As for Hong-Hu and Snow, even though they did not have a clear goal like Brother Jew, after a short consideration, they also chose to take the samples. This was because they knew that the body pieces of these rare monsters were like dragon scales, phoenix eyes, and Kirin teeth. They had to have a special use or value. In the later stages of the game, the higher level summoning, sorcery, and mechanical mastery skills would often require such items. If there was a book, it would be long. If there was no book, it would be short. 20 minutes later, Queen Anna's Revenge set sail again. At the same time, the wind picked up on the sea. The wind was neither too strong nor too weak, and it pushed the Queen's Revenge towards its target. It was as if there was a force helping the pirates. Therefore, someone said, "This is Mr. Erdini's soul protecting us and sending us on our way." No one objected to that. People who stayed at sea for a long time would often become superstitious, and pirates were probably the most superstitious group of people. Their superstitions were different from normal people's superstitions. The things that pirates believed in had nothing to do with most of the orthodox religions. Of course, this was normal, be it Christianity, Buddhism, or Taoism. In short, as long as it was a religion that guided people to be good, it was not suitable for pirates. Imagine if you believed in a religion, and then you realized that, according to the religion, 9 out of 10 things you did would lead you to hell. What was the point of believing in that religion? If every religion in the world had its own hell, then pirates would be able to go to any of them without a visa. Therefore, the superstitions of the pirates were mostly based on the more bizarre legends of the gods and monsters, voodoo cults, and some of the ghost stories that were passed down by the sailors. Among them, there was such a legend The death of every respected old sailor will bring good luck to the people on this ship for half a day. No one knew when or who spread this rumor, but the pirates believed in this kind of nonsense. Perhaps in the eyes of a normal person, this kind of nonsense was nothing, but in the eyes of the pirates, this kind of nonsense was more believable than the stories in religion. Because religion came from lies, ghost stories came from the truth. The wind was still blowing, and the ship sailed quickly and smoothly. The atmosphere on the deck returned to normal, as if the battle and the death of the first mate did not happen. This was how pirates were. They would never grieve for a person for too long, no matter who that person was. Bastards, the fight is about to start. If you want to place your bets, come over quickly. As dusk approached, a hoarse voice suddenly let out such a loud shout. In a split second, the surrounding pirates were in an uproar. Previously, in the conflict with the Mad-Eye Pirates, the players had naturally completed the mission, board the enemy's ship and kill at least 3 enemy sailors. The mission only required 1 out of 3 players to board the enemy's ship, and the total number of kills exceeded 3. Now, the second side mission that needed to be completed on the ship, participate in the fight on the deck and defeat the Vikings, was finally placed in front of them. After hearing the announcement, Fong Bujiwe and the others followed the crowd and gathered in an empty space in the middle of the deck. Unknowingly, someone had used wooden barrels, sacks, and boxes to create a space similar to a fighting ring. Come. Those who want to bet, hurry up. If you're a man, don't waste time. At this moment, the person standing on top of a box and shouting was Brother Jew, and the others recognized. It was the small steel cannon like Brother Body Hair. Behind him, the 2 who were responsible for collecting, keeping accounts, and counting money were Godfrey wearing a blue headscarf and the leader of the trio, Garlic. When fighting with the Mad-Eye Pirates, and when besieging the parasites, Fong Bujiwe took the time to pay attention to the movements of the 3. He unexpectedly found that the 3 people were very desperate in the external battle, and their strength was very strong. Perhaps it was for this reason that the ship's officers and Blackbeard adopted an attitude of turning a blind eye to the behavior of the 3 people who carried out the gambling business on the ship. Is there anyone else who wants to bet? If not, let's start. The efficiency of the trio was very high. Obviously, they were quite familiar with the business. In about 5 minutes, they finished collecting the bets. Then, Brother Body Hair shouted twice. After confirming that there were no more bets, he turned his head and winked at a man standing in the middle of the ring. That man was the one with the hoarse voice who had shouted the first time and gathered everyone over. At the same time, he was also the lead singer who led everyone to sing the ship's song in the opening CG. This man looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing a dirty and wrinkled white shirt, a red and yellow vest, and a pair of loose and light black trousers. Perhaps it was because his trousers were once very expensive, or perhaps it was because he only had 1 pair of trousers. In any case, his trousers were heavily patched, and from the rough stitches, it was most likely patched by him himself. Greedy villains. Twice a week, the time you look forward to the most has arrived. After receiving the signal from Brother Body Hair, the hoarse voice immediately began his provocative opening speech. It must be admitted that this man's voice and speech were first class, and he definitely had no problem being a professional host. Today's first match, as announced last time, will be dedicated by 2 rookies who have just joined the pirate group for a month. Before his voice fell, the 2 participating sailors had already entered the ring from both sides of the ring. The 2 didn't say much. After entering the ring, they first took off their shirts and then provoked each other with their faces. It can be said that they instantly entered the competition state. Let's welcome. The hoarse voice also introduced in a timely manner, Bottle Opener and Triceratops. Chapter 1307. No one knew who made the rule, but everyone who participated in the competition had to be given a nickname. Bottle Opener and Triceratops were not real names. Of course, this was a good thing, because if the real names were announced, the audience would likely hear the introduction of Let's Welcome John Smith and James Brown. That would be quite boring. Back to the topic. Amidst the noise of the surrounding pirates, the two contestants slowly walked to the center of the ring. The hoarse voice stood in the middle of the two men, preventing them from having any physical contact before the competition officially started. The two contestants also used the last preparation time to check their boxing gloves. The boxing gloves were provided by the organizers of the deck fight. In order to ensure the safety and aesthetic of the competition, the contestants must wear boxing gloves to participate in the competition. When the atmosphere was heated up, the hoarse voice began to read the rules. There are 5 rules. First, no props of any kind. Second, no special abilities. Third, no hitting below the waist. Fourth, no maliciously crippling the opponent. Fifth, no killing. Speaking of this, he paused and continued. Those who violate the first 4 rules will be immediately disqualified. As for those who violate the 5th rule, he just smiled and did not say what the punishment would be for killing. However, all the crew members were well aware of the consequences. On the Queen Anna's Revenge, the act of intentionally killing a companion was a matter of principle. Even if the person who committed such an act escaped to the ends of the earth, Blackbeard would still find him and punish him according to the law. Well, is there anything you two don't understand? A few seconds later, the hoarse voice looked at the two contestants and asked, "No, let's get started." The response of the two was quick and resolute. They were like 2 male beasts in heat, full of fighting spirit and energy. Then, today's first match, Bottle Opener versus Triceratops. Now, begin. The hoarse voice was very familiar with this sentence. As he spoke, he stepped back. When he finished the last 2 words, he was out of the range of the ring. Puff! A second later, the sound of fists colliding could be heard. The gloves used in the deck boxing match were specially made with magical materials. Other than the protective functions of ordinary gloves, the most important function of the gloves was to limit the upper limit of the user's physical skills. Because the members of the Blackbeard Pirates are generally very strong, if they're allowed to fight with their bare hands, even if they don't use special abilities, it is easy to form a situation where 3 punches and 1 skin is split open and one's bones is broken. In that kind of competition, as long as one wasn't careful, there would be accidental injuries or even accidental deaths. Therefore, Garlic Bro and the others came up with the idea of boxing gloves. Wearing these boxing gloves, the strength, speed, stamina, resistance, and other basic attributes related to physical skills would be suppressed to a certain level. This way, they could ensure that the deck boxing match was mainly a contest of skills and not purely a contest of strength. Of course, the limit of the gloves itself also has a limit. Once the wearer's physical ability exceeds the limit of this item, there is no difference between wearing it and not wearing it. This is also why none of the officers on the ship could participate in this competition. Puff! Just as I was explaining the settings, Bottle Opener had the upper hand in the match. Relying on a round of fast and powerful attacks, he gradually forced Triceratops to the edge of the ring, or next to a barrel. "Hey, hold on, you bastard. Come on, beat him down. I bet a week's worth of wine money on this. Hurry up and beat him down." The audience, who stood outside the ring and placed their bets, it can be said that they were not stingy with their vocal cords. They were all shouting at the top of their lungs, expressing their positions and motives. Perhaps this is not the best atmosphere in the competition, and it has nothing to do with sports spirit. But for this kind of unorthodox competition, this is the right atmosphere. What do you guys think? At this time, Fong Bujue, who was watching the boxing match from a rope net high up, asked his 2 teammates next to him who will win. Hong Hu and Snow were also hanging from the rope, using their extraordinary eyesight to observe the situation on the other side of the ring. "I don't know much about boxing." After hearing this, Hong Hu replied in a non-committal tone, but looking at the situation. "Bottle Opener is about to win, right?" "Huh." At this moment, Snow's face showed an expression of an experienced driver. He chuckled and said, "Bro Hong Hu, this time you are wrong." He paused for half a second, then said confidently, "In my opinion, although these 2 people's boxing skills are not very good, relatively speaking, Triceratops has a little bit of basic knowledge, so Oh, Hong, who was also a rather experienced person. When he heard the meaning behind these words, he understood that Snow was preparing to take the opportunity to boast. So, he went with the flow and said, Bro Snow, you seem to know quite a bit about boxing. Why don't you analyze it for us? Fong Buju also went with the flow and said, I want to hear it too. Even though the Triceratops was still being beaten up in a boxing ring while the three of them were talking, Snow still had a confident look on his face as he said, Actually, for an expert, it's something that's easy to understand at a glance. First of all, you have to look at the posture of the body, the posture of the hands, and the footsteps. You guys pay attention. From the start of the fight until now, even though he has been forced to retreat by the opponent, Triceratops' overall posture has not changed much. The movement of his footsteps has also maintained a fast and steady rhythm. Secondly, look at the defense. The defense of professional boxing is a very high-level skill. Many people think that boxing is a simple sport where two people fight each other, but in fact, the technical content is much higher than many seemingly fancy sports, and defensive skills are the most important in this area. Those who think that this sport is simple, if they go up against a professional boxer, forget about exchanging blows. Even if the other party doesn't punch and allows them to hit him, they won't be able to win. Because in the face of professional defensive skills, the punches of ordinary people can't even touch the opponent's body. Of course, the Triceratops in front of us is not that powerful. He is at most an entry-level fighter. Even so far, his defense is still watertight. Wait a minute, Hong, who interrupted at this time. It's not quite right to say watertight, is it? He pointed in the direction of the ring with his finger. Triceratops has been getting beaten up all this time. However, there's not a single effective punch, right? Snow continued. A professional punch is another matter. At least this bottle opener punch. If it hits the arm or the outside of the body, or if it is blocked by the boxing gloves, the damage caused is almost negligible. Not only is there no damage, on the contrary, it has caused his physical fitness to decline faster than the defender. At this moment, Fong Buju suddenly took over Snow's words and said this. Heh, Snow immediately laughed. So you know it too. Are you pretending again? Yes. Fong Buju admitted it without thinking much. Why raise the question just now? I just wanted to take the opportunity to show off my knowledge in front of the two of you. I didn't expect. You're also an understanding person, so I'll let you pretend to be tough. After hearing such sincere and vulgar words, Snow narrowed his eyes and complained, Should I admire your honesty, or should I marvel at the thickness of your skin? When they were talking about this on the boxing ring, there was a sudden change. They saw that bottle opener was gradually showing signs of exhaustion after a series of fierce attacks. His punches were no longer as strong and fast as before, and his breathing was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing this, Triceratops knew that the time had come. He seized a gap in his opponent's punches and counterattacked with a jab to hit bottle opener's chin. Although it was just one punch, an effective punch was more effective than 10 ineffective punches that were blocked by the defender. Bottle opener stumbled and lost his balance. He took a few steps back before he regained his balance. He did not fall to the ground for the time being. Triceratops sneered and chased after him, greeting him with a set of combo punches. Bottle opener had used up too much of his physical strength in the attack just now. His reaction could no longer keep up, and he was instantly defeated. Triceratops, on the other hand, used the width of the arena with brisk footwork, changed his moves in a roundabout way, and combined the real and the fake. Soon, he disrupted bottle opener's footwork and posture. In this way, it was natural for flaws to appear in the defender's defense. Brother Hong Hu, can you see the difference between the two's punches? At this moment, Snow spoke again. Hong Hu also quickly replied, In comparison, it's quite obvious. Bottle opener's punches mainly rely on brute force and instinctively punching out. Triceratops' punches rely on explosive force, not just his arms and shoulders. He uses strength from his lower body to his waist and back. After punching out, his body can also regain its balance in a very short period of time and be ready to make the next move. That's right, This is the difference in the level of offense, Snow nodded. Snow nodded and continued. If you want to win in this kind of boxing match where there is no rest between rounds, mastering the correct way of punching can be said to be a necessary condition. Otherwise, you will be like that Mr. Bottle Opener. Even if you seize the opportunity to attack first, you will exhaust your strength in a very short time and fall into an irreversible defeat. Bang! Before Snow could finish his words, on the other side of the boxing ring, Bottle Opener's sturdy body had already fallen to the ground. Fall to the ground, the hoarse voice shouted at the first moment and began to count. 1, 2, 3. Just now, just as Snow and Hong, who were discussing the way of punching, Bottle Opener on the boxing ring took another 5 or 6 effective hits from Triceratops. And these 5 or 6 hits were enough to end this contest. 4, 5, 6. Although the hoarse voice could tell at a glance that this guy could no longer stand up for the sake of the show's effect, he still counted there and consciously slowed down his count. Get up quickly, bastard. Damn it, my money for wine is gone. Yay, well done. Beautifully fought. Seeing that the winner had been decided, the reaction of the audience was naturally mixed. There were winners and there were losers. Fortunately, there was a limit to the amount of money that could be bet. This rule was approved by Blackbeard through the mouth of the cadre, and it was also because of this that the boxing tournament on the deck was always controlled within the scope of small gambling for fun. Until now, there hadn't been any trouble. The winner wouldn't make a fortune, and the loser wouldn't jump into the sea to commit suicide. 9, 10. The hoarse voice took nearly 20 seconds before he finally finished counting to 10. He immediately jumped into the ring, grabbed Triceratops' right wrist, and raised it abruptly. Winner, Triceratops. The moment the result was announced, cheers, boos, and sighs of disappointment intertwined sounded. Next, it was time to settle the accounts for the first round of bets, and time to place their bets for the second round. This matter was still settled by Garlic Bro and the other two. It didn't take much time to settle the accounts, because only those who won money needed to settle the accounts. The time for the second round of bets wasn't long either, because in the first round, there would definitely be people who lost all or won enough. Thus, they wouldn't participate in the later rounds of bets. In short, after 7 or 8 minutes, the preparations for the second round were ready. The hoarse voice once again stood in the middle of the ring and shouted, "Guys, today's warm-up match seems to have ended a little too quickly, right?" He paused and laughed. "It doesn't matter. The sooner we finish watching the rookies pecking each other, the sooner we can see the main show." As the host of a pirate ship, he didn't have to care too much about his words and actions. He didn't have to worry about offending people at all. For example, the phrase "rookies pecking each other" in front of him was definitely inappropriate for a host to say in a formal match. But on a pirate ship, not to mention shouting "rookies," it didn't matter even if he cursed at someone's mother. The pirates who spoke vulgarly wouldn't hold a grudge against each other because of a few unpleasant words. Now, let's welcome. A few seconds later, the hoarse voice's pitch rose by a few notches. The current defending champion of the Dex boxing tournament. At the same time, Brother Bodyhair was actually holding an upside-down iron bucket, using 2 broken broom handles to beat out a tight drumbeat. 45 matches. 45 wins. The hoarse voice didn't report the number of KOs, because all the victories in the Dex boxing tournament were KOs. So far, he has no record of being knocked down, an absolute expert who easily wins every match with absolute advantage. He is a giant from the north. He is a sea monster who crawled out of the abyss. He is the maker of pain, the trampler of confidence. He is a Viking man. Chapter 1308. When the hoarse voice shouted the words "Viking," the 3 players who were watching the match on the rope net immediately focused their attention. 2 seconds later, a 1.9 tall, burly, and muscular bald man walked out from the crowd and entered the ring. A few minutes ago, when the audience was still placing their bets, the defending champion had already taken off his shirt, tied his gloves, and was ready to fight. Go for it, Viking. You can definitely win. Viking, we support you. The supporters of the champion, or rather, The gamblers who had placed their bets on him could not wait to start cheering for him. "Gentlemen," the man with the hoarse voice struck while the iron was hot. He paused for a moment before he said, "Next, we would like to invite this week's challenger, who is also the winner of last week's warm-up match, who has won one battle after another. Mirror Shield." Before he finished speaking, another man who was slightly thinner than the Viking, but still quite tall, entered the ring. When this man stepped onto the ring, there were not many cheers for him. On the contrary, there were some boos. Obviously, this Mirror Shield bro wasn't thought highly of, and not many people were willing to bet money on him. "Gentlemen, please take a few steps forward." Different from the atmosphere before the first match, the two fighters in the main match were quite calm. They did not provoke each other at all. Therefore, the hoarse voice could only take the initiative to call them to the center of the ring and announce, "You know the rules, right?" Even though he said that, he still patiently repeated the 5 rules. It was not for any other reason. It was because they were indeed very important. After he finished speaking, the hoarse voice continued, "Gentlemen, is there anything else you don't understand? Ha! I have heard this 45 times. What do you think?" The Viking's voice was very consistent with his image. It sounded deep and powerful. "No," Mirror Shield replied with a single word. His voice was the same as his answer. There was nothing special about it. "Okay," the hoarse voice continued then. "I announced today's second match." Speaking up to this point, he retreated out of the ring. "The championship match between Viking and Mirror Shield begins now." Creak, creak, footsteps on the deck. Almost as soon as the announcement was made, the two contestants moved. However, none of them moved forward. On the contrary, they all took 2 steps back at the same time. So that's how it is. The two guys in the second round, compared to the fighters in the first round, are on a completely different level, Fong Bujua said without hesitation when he saw this scene. "Because they are more cautious?" Hong Hu continued, "No, this isn't being cautious." At this moment, Snow answered before Brother Ju could. "It's not some expert's intuition, it's just a simple tactic." "Yulong, your reaction is still slow," Fong Bujua said to Hong Hu. "Didn't you hear it just now? That Viking has already defended his title dozens of times. That means he has already fought dozens of boxing matches on deck in front of everyone. As for that Mirror Shield, he was the winner of the warm-up match in the previous boxing match on deck. This means that he has also fought at least one boxing match in public." Oh, after Snow's reminder, Hong Hu understood. The two of them have already seen each other's matches. Therefore, based on the information they know, they made the judgment that they should keep their distance from each other at the start of the match. Bingo! Snow snapped his fingers and continued. Just based on this point, it's enough to see that their standard is very different from the previous two. He paused for a while. "Do you still remember the bottle opener and Triceratops?" The first thing they did after the match started was to fight with their fists. Although this is indeed the most direct way to test each other's strength and punching speed, under the premise that there is insufficient information, this kind of action is actually very dangerous. If your opponent is an expert who is much more powerful than you, then you might be killed in an instant after the first punch. "Hey, be careful. The Viking is about to attack," Fong Bujue reminded his two teammates at an extremely fast speed. When Snow and Hong Hu were talking, their gazes did not leave the boxing ring. They had also noticed the changes in the ring. They saw that after a short stalemate, the Vikings suddenly leaned forward and rushed forward like a wild horse that had escaped its reins. With a height of 9 meters and a burly body, it was undoubtedly not easy for him to perform such an action under the premise that his physical ability was limited. His opponent's Mirror Shield also reacted instantly. He immediately leaned his upper body back and leaned his body to the side, making use of his nimble footwork to create a certain amount of relative stillness in the process of retreating in order to make an effective defense. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Very quickly, the Viking punched. The shadows of his punches were accompanied by the sound of wind breaking, but he did not hit his target even once. Of course, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that he did not use his full strength in these few punches. The Vikings' round of attacks seemed to be aggressive, but in fact, it was mainly to test out the opponent's strength. The punches that he threw were all based on the premise of quickly retracting his fist and not messing up his posture. However, due to his extremely powerful strength, even such testing level of attack had a considerable lethality. Whoa, that's really impressive. Feng Bujua watched for a few seconds and said, "Only in this kind of boxing match, where there is no interval between rounds or referee intervention, can such a method of testing be seen." Then, Hong Hu, who knew nothing about boxing, was also interested. How does the testing in a regular boxing match usually look like? According to the different levels, there will be a certain difference. Feng Bujue replied, "Anyway, the opening of the testing for the super middleweight level and above is generally touching." Hearing those two words, Snow couldn't help but complain, "Why can you make such a normal thing sound a little dirty, haha?" Ambitionist also laughed dryly, then turned to Snow and said, "Brother Snow, why don't you tell me about it?" Snow muttered to himself for a second and continued, "Let's put it this way. In a regular boxing match, if two boxers who have never fought each other before go up against each other, the purpose of the testing at the beginning is to find out the distance. To put it more vividly, both parties will use their bodies to test each other's actual punches, arm span, striking speed, as well as the best killing distance and other information. Because for this kind of information, no matter how many videos are watched, or how many sparring partners with similar physical conditions as the opponent to test, it's impossible to get a particularly accurate feeling. Only when facing the opponent in person and using their fists to touch each other a few times can one be sure." "Oh," Hong Hu seemed to understand. "So, what exactly do you mean by distance? Isn't it just arm span?" "Arm span is only one of the factors that determine distance," Snow replied. "When a person punches, the best killing distance is related to many factors such as shoulder width, arm span, the subtle differences between bones and muscles, the posture of punching, the reaction speed of the muscle explosion, and so on. Let's not talk about the more complicated ones. Let's give a simple example. In real life, most people don't know what kind of posture they should use and how far away they should hit the target in order to deliver the most powerful punch." He paused for a second and continued, "And professional boxers will know this. They can even make it more detailed. For example, how far away they need to be from the target for their most powerful straight punch, what distance they need to throw an uppercut, what distance they need to throw a punch, and so on. Those top boxers can not only accurately grasp their own distance, but they can also quickly figure out their opponent's distance during a duel. The last boxing champion of the last century, Lennox Lewis, was a genius at controlling distance. Among his contemporaries, there were people whose footwork was more agile than his, and there were people whose heavy punches were more lethal than his. His only obvious advantage might be his arm length, but he was still the most dominant boxer during that period because his judgment of distance was impeccable. As long as he grasped the distance correctly, he could avoid his opponent's most powerful killing blow when he was defending. And when he was attacking, he could rely on one of the few effective heavy punches to make the final decision. Once he started talking about boxing, Snow started talking nonstop. It looked like he was really an old hand. Not only did he have a lot of knowledge in this area, but he also had a lot of unique insights. Hong Hu's comprehension was not bad. After listening to this long paragraph, he was able to digest it. After thinking for a while, he continued, "Then isn't the probing method of this Viking in front of us a little too rash?" He paused for half a second and added, "If he fights like this, he will only expose his distance unilaterally, right?" At this time, Feng Bujue, who had been listening for a long time, slowly said, "This shows that he is very confident in his face." Hong Hu did not understand this sentence. "What do you mean?" Bang! Before Brother Ju could reply, the two men in the boxing ring used their actions to answer Hong Hu's doubts. At this moment, Mirror Shield's straight punch landed on the Viking's face. Just now, when the three players were chatting, the Vikings' attacks did not stop. In a situation where both parties were relatively equal in strength, it was impossible for one party to completely dodge the other party's attacks. Thus, Mirror Shield quickly slowed down his pace and used padding and blocking moves to defend. On the other hand, the Viking did not give up. He used the same walking and fighting rhythm to search for a breakthrough point. Under such pressure, Mirror Shield naturally had to counterattack a few times. If he only defended, some of the habits and flaws in his defense would be exposed faster than the flaws in his opponent's offense. Thus, we saw the attack in front of us. When the Viking threw a punch, Mirror Shield dodged and took advantage of the opening of the Viking's defense to throw a powerful straight punch straight at the Viking's face. However, the damage caused by this attack was far from what most of the audience had imagined, because in that split second, the Viking, who had judged that he would definitely be punched, immediately rushed his head forward and used his face to collide with Mirror Shield's punch. Look, using his face to block the opponent's counterattack, Phone Bujua said. Following that will be. What happened at the same time as Brother Jew's words was, the Viking took advantage of the fact that Mirror Shield had not retracted his right hand to throw another punch at Mirror Shield's face. Hey, don't tell me that using face to fist is also a tactic. Hong, who pushed up his glasses and shrugged. No matter what, the resistance of this part of the body cannot be trained. Sure. Unexpectedly, Snow answered at this moment. Of course. To be exact, it's not to train the face's ability to withstand blows, but to train the head ability to withstand blows. As he spoke, he touched his neck. The method is very harsh, painful, and may even leave behind repercussions. Also, before Snow could finish his sentence, Phone Bujua continued, using face to fist is indeed a tactic. He continued without turning his head. Didn't Snow say that every punch has an optimal killing distance? When you're certain that you cannot dodge the incoming punch, there's a final method to reduce the damage, and that is to quickly shorten the distance. Take the Viking as an example. Using his face as a counter, it caused Mirror Shield's punch to hit the target and stop before the Viking's arm and wrist could even straighten out. As a result, the power of the punch was greatly reduced. At least, it was reduced to the point where the Viking could grit his teeth and endure it. As for Mirror Shield's subsequent punch, I'm afraid it wasn't that easy. A second later, Snow followed up on Brother Jew's words and added half a sentence. As the two of them echoed each other, the Viking on the field had already followed up his victory and gave Mirror Shield a series of punches. From a nickname used by the contestants, it could be seen that Mirror Shield was very confident in his defensive skills, and the actual situation was indeed so. Even after taking a heavy punch and being pursued continuously, Mirror Shield did not panic. He only followed the basic principles and adjusted his posture as he took the beating, gradually returning to his normal defensive rhythm. Seeing this, the Viking snorted coldly and then slowed down the frequency of his attacks. Hence, amidst the boos from the audience who could not see the trick, the second match seemed to have entered the rhythm of a tug-of-war. However, Brother Jew and Snow, who were on high ground, did not think so. At this moment, the two of them said in unison, it's over. Chapter 1309. The basis for Phone Bujua and Snow's judgment was simple, because they had already seen a message from the Vikings' recent punches. The probing is over. From a perspective of an outsider, the Viking's slowing down of his attack seemed to indicate that he had yet to find a way to break through his opponent's defense. But in reality, this was a performance of victory in hand. He was using his actions to tell Mirror Shield, I have already made preparations to win and can end this match anytime. But I can still give you a chance to counterattack and make you accept your defeat wholeheartedly. Mirror Shield, who was equally capable, naturally understood this point. He knew that just now, that one and only counterattack punch had already exposed his distance to his opponent. Following this, his counterattack and offense would be completely ineffective, and breaking through his defense was only a matter of time. In this match, without the guidance of a coach, and without the interval between rounds, it was unlikely for Mirror Shield to rely on his own thinking to reverse this disadvantage on a technical level. Therefore, he could only make use of the last chance given by the Viking and give it his all for the final gamble. This was a risk, and in a sense, it could also be seen as a trap set by the Viking. But Mirror Shield had no choice. Because his standard was not low, he knew that he had no choice but to charge into this trap. If he could charge through it, there would still be hope for victory. If he couldn't, the outcome would be no different. If he persisted in his current defensive stance, he might be able to hold on for a while longer, but that would be nothing more than a slow death. Puff! 2 seconds later, Mirror Shield struck out with his first attack in this match, a left-hand jab. His footsteps and posture also changed the moment he switched from defense to offense. Feint! In the same second, Fong Bujue and Snow muttered the same word in their hearts. Puff! The second punch, followed closely by a straight right hand. Looking at it together with the first punch, this was a very common combo. The first punch would attract the opponent's attention, and the second punch would strike. But it's still a feint. Brother Bujue and Snow had already seen through that Mirror Shield was not using such a simple method. Sure enough, in that split second, the Mirror Shield punched out a third time. This is the killing move. This time, Fong Bujue directly muttered these words. Mirror Shield's third punch was a straight left punch. However, its power was vastly different from the second punch, which was also a straight left punch. At the moment of the punch, Mirror Shield's knee was bent forward, increasing the power of the punch to the point where it could knock down or even KO the opponent. Objectively speaking, this set of one stab, two straight combo was not complicated. The technical difficulty was mainly focused on the third punch. However, as far as the surprise effect was concerned, it was still acceptable. Because Mirror Shield was right-handed, it was obvious that he had thought it through before choosing this left, right, left punching pattern. Unfortunately, his intentions did not escape the eyes of the Vikings. After blocking the first punch and preparing to use a slap to deal with the second punch, the Vikings instantly understood the truth of the second punch being a feint. Hence, he directly ignored the second punch, pressing both his elbows against his body and lowering his head. As he forcefully received the second punch, he used 120% of his attention to stare at Mirror Shield's left hand. As for Mirror Shield, he had actually thrown out the third punch. Everything was within the Vikings' control. When Mirror Shield's third punch was about to explode, he leaned forward and snatched the right side of Mirror Shield's chest. Bang! Immediately after, a powerful punch landed solidly on the right side of Mirror Shield's chin. Before Mirror Shield's third punch could be completely straightened, he had already lost his balance due to the impact on his chin. In order to increase the power of his punch, he had bent his knee and bent forward, which had instead aided the Vikings' punch. KO! There was no dispute about the outcome. This time, the hoarse voice didn't even need to count down because Mirror Shield had directly lost consciousness after collapsing to the ground. Situations like this, where the contestant was temporarily unconscious, were common in all kinds of fighting competitions, especially when the chin was punched, because the cerebellum would be affected. The person who was hit would easily fall to the ground and be unable to get up. Victor, Viking. When a few sailors carried the day's Mirror Shield out of the boxing ring, the hoarse voice had already raised the Viking's right hand and loudly announced the outcome of the match. The crowd immediately let out cheers, but this time, the cheers were lukewarm. This was because most of the people had placed their bets on the Viking. Hence, the returns from his odds were limited, and even if he won, he wouldn't earn much. After a dozen seconds, when the surroundings gradually quietened down, the hoarse voice continued. All right, today's deck boxing match is about to end. Wait a moment. All of a sudden, a long howl came from above, interrupting the hoarse voice's words. The originally dispirited pirates who were about to disperse were all attracted by this howl as they looked towards the source of the sound. The one who shouted wasn't anyone else but Fong Bujue. Although the hoarse voice was displeased with the other party's interruption, he naturally had to be courteous when he saw that it was Brother Jew. Mr. Fong, may I ask, what advice do you have? At this moment, Fong Bujue gave a meaningful glance to his two teammates who were similarly clueless as to what he was up to, following which he leaped down from the rope net. Hong Hu and Snow looked at each other in dismay, each revealing a helpless expression before following suit. I wouldn't dare to give advice. After Brother Ju landed, he coincidentally stood on a wooden box at the edge of the boxing ring. He looked towards the hoarse voice a few meters away and said, "I only wish to say to be able to witness such an exciting match today, it's an honor. But it's a pity that the defending champion's appearance was a little too short. Therefore, I hope that this Viking brother can fight another round and broaden our horizons." This, as the hoarse voice spoke, he turned his head to look at the garlic trio and muttered, "This isn't too appropriate." After pausing for half a second, he glanced at the Viking and said, "You see, the Viking has just finished a match. It's fine." Unexpectedly, the Viking revealed an eager expression and said, "It's just as well. I haven't fought to my heart's content yet." He glanced at Mirror Shield, who was lying outside the ring, and was slowly waking up, and said, "Although Mirror Shield fought well, from the results, he didn't cause me too much trouble. After the match, just now, I didn't suffer any injuries and my stamina was still abundant. Treating it as a warm-up doesn't seem to be inappropriate." "Heh, I think so too." Fong Bujue smiled and paused for a second before looking at Garlic Bro and the others. "I think everyone would like to see what kind of result would a Viking compete with us, the passengers outside of the pirate crew." On the surface, his words were said for everyone to hear, but in fact, he was hinting to Garlic Bro, who had the real decision-making power. His meaning was, "You guys will profit from this bet." "Yeah, seems pretty interesting." "Viking, we support you." Yes, let's have a match. Let's have a match. Let's have a match. Let's have a match." The pirates didn't mind too much trouble. Moreover, Brother Ju's words were indeed quite inciting. In less than half a minute, the surrounding crowd began to shout, "Let's have a match," in unison. It seemed this battle was inevitable. All right." Finally, Garlic Bro, who had been sitting there silently taking notes, stood up and said to Fong Bujue, "But are you sure you can fight?" After asking this question, Garlic Bro briefly explained the settings of the boxing gloves to Brother Ju, and then said, "I think, Mr. Fong, your strength has already exceeded the upper limit of the suppression of the boxing gloves, right?" "Oh, so that's what you're worried about." Brother Ju listened calmly. "I didn't say that I would fight personally." "Why don't you say, I fought back for the last side mission with a saber?" Why does it sound like you've accidentally said life instead of saber when you say this? Snow narrowed his eyes and said, "And how much do you care about the loss of equipment? Are you planning to talk about it for the rest of your life?" "That's none of your business." Fong Bujue said, "My initial plan is to talk about this until the end of this scenario. Do you have any objections?" Okay. That kind of thing will do." Hong, who spoke again before the bickering between the two of them escalated, trying to bring the topic back on track. "Let's talk about the boxing match." He looked at Snow. "Are you confident?" "No." Snow's reply was crisp and clear. Regardless of his expression or tone, there was no sign of him lying. The corner of Hong, whose mouth twitched twice. "I thought you were an expert." "I am indeed an expert. And I even invited." When Snow said this, he almost blurted out the name of a famous boxing coach. Fortunately, he realized in time that it was inappropriate to say this, so he immediately changed his words. "I hired a professional coach to guide me. In total, I've trained for about 2 years. Even if I wanted to take the test for a professional boxer's license, it would be more than enough." He paused. "But because I'm an expert, I understand that my chances of winning are very slim. Not to mention that my opponent's weight is at least 3 levels higher than mine, and his height and arm span are also longer than mine. Just based on skills alone, the Viking is better than me in all aspects. Not to mention his advantage in this kind of competition and his boxing talent that makes people despair." "Is that so?" Hong, who heard that, and pushed up his glasses. "Does that mean the system gave you an impossible mission?" "How is that possible?" Fong Bujue continued. "You've been playing this game for so long. When did the system give you that kind of impossible mission?" He spread out his hands. "In the end, It's your idea of using proper boxing skills to defeat your opponent that's wrong. Oh, hearing Brother Bujue's words, Snow and Hong, whose faces showed a hint of evil at the same time. What you mean is humph. Feng Bujue crossed his arms in front of his chest and put on a confident look. It's time to let these naive pirates know what the real underground boxing is. Chapter 13:10. Guys, I think everyone can't wait any longer. After a few minutes, all the preparations were completed. The hoarse voice came to the center of the ring again to stir up the atmosphere. This is the first time since the start of the deck boxing tournament that players other than the pirates are participating, and they're challenging our one and only, the Vikings. For a moment, the crowd was in an uproar. Most of the pirates obviously supported the Vikings. In this kind of restricted competition, his ability to win consecutive matches was unquestionable. However, there were also many people who had placed their bets on Snow, not for any other reason, but because his odds were very high. It wasn't that Garlic Bro and the others wanted to raise the odds, but Snow's slightly frail figure didn't seem to be able to withstand a beating. Although Snow's figure was not bad compared to ordinary people, and it was obvious that he was the kind of person who usually worked out, but compared to this group of muscular pirates whose arms were thicker than your legs, he was still a small and skinny guy. The two of you, please come to the center. After attracting the attention of the audience, the hoarse voice gathered the two boxers and was about to announce the start of the match. According to the rules, he still patiently repeated the rules and asked, "Do you all understand?" Snow and the Vikings immediately gave him an affirmative answer. After getting the answer, the hoarse voice took a few steps back. "Good. Then, I announce the match between the most talented man in the last 2,000 years of the Arte Godfists, Snow, and our 46 matches, 46 victories, unparalleled skill, and frightening defending champion, the Viking." He mixed the introduction and the opening speech together and dragged it out for a long time. "Now start." The hoarse voice could always exit the ring at the same time as he finished his sentence. It was as though he had eyes on the back of his head. "Huh." Just as his hoarse voice uttered the word begin, Snow slowly raised his left fist with a smile on his face and extended it forward. His action could be considered as a sign of goodwill in the boxing ring. Of course, it wasn't a request for the opponent to be merciful. It was just a courteous gesture similar to the handshakes of the captains before a football match. At this moment, as an opponent, he should also extend a fist and lightly touch the opponent's fist. Only then would he enter the duel state. The Vikings naturally knew about such common knowledge. Moreover, he was a man with the demeanor of a great general. Therefore, he responded without any hesitation. Who would have thought? Who? Just as the Viking slowly extended his right hand, preparing to lightly touch his opponent's outstretched fist, Snow suddenly took a step forward, swinging his right arm and punching at the opponent's head. F***CK. The Vikings were shocked. Snow's behavior, to put it more vividly, was like giving you a slap on the face with his left hand when you let your guard down when he extended his right hand to shake your hand. Even the pirates couldn't bear to watch such a tasteless thing. The crowd suddenly burst out with cries of Henrichette and Walter F***CK. But no matter what, this wasn't against the rules, so the competition continued. B***Starbrat. At that critical moment, the Vikings instinctively lowered his head and retreated, barely withstanding the punch with his left shoulder. At the same time, he was cursing in his heart. "You actually dare to play such petty tricks in front of me." As the punch came too suddenly, the Vikings' defensive actions and strength adjustment weren't in place. This caused his left arm to feel slightly numb after taking the punch. Fortunately, he was experienced and didn't give Snow a chance to pursue. He immediately raised his left arm and threw 2 jabs at his opponent. These 2 jabs weren't for the sake of gaining any advantage, but to substitute offense for defense and force his opponent to retreat. TSK. He's as watertight as I imagined. On the other side, Snow was thinking in his heart, using extreme movements to minimize the damage from my sneak attack, and quickly making use of the advantage of his arm reach. restricting my pursuit and gaining precious time to adjust. Can such a boxing champion really be defeated by tricks? Indeed, even now, Snow didn't have much confidence in this matter. But since Brother Jew had brought him to this stage, he had to give it his all and think of a way to win this match. The next second, Snow raised both his fists to protect the sides of his head. He lowered his upper body as much as possible and charged into the Viking's embrace. What is he trying to do now? The Vikings didn't panic, and neither did his stance. Pooh. Immediately after, Snow's left hook bypassed the Viking's defensive hand and hit the latter's torso from the side. With the Viking's sturdy muscles, a few punches to the torso would definitely not cause any damage. After being punched, the Vikings took the opportunity to retreat. With steady steps, he circled around his opponent clockwise and threw a straight left punch at Snow. Bang! The punch was powerful, but Snow had already returned to a defensive stance, using the outer sides of his fists to protect his head. After blocking this blow, Snow repeated the same trick and once again leaned forward to dash forward. Pooh. This time he launched a few quick short uppercuts at close range, aiming for the Viking's chin. So that's how it is. The Vikings retreated and blocked, but he still didn't suffer any substantial damage. So this is your plan. The Vikings retreated and circled around, but Snow followed him like a shadow, charging into his opponent's embrace with an extremely low defensive stance. From the very beginning, he's given up on the intention to exchange blows with me. He's completely ignoring my actions and using this method of continuous close-range pressure. As the Viking thought of this, he had already retreated to the corner of the ring and was caught by Snow. Puff. While hugging his opponent, Snow seized the opportunity to hit the right side of his opponent's torso, as though he was racing against time. In close-range combat, using such punches that don't have much power but can't be defended to continuously attack my liver. Seeing this, the Viking sneered in his heart. To think that I was looking forward to it for such a long time. In the end, it's just an opponent of this standard, kid. At this moment, the Vikings suddenly spoke to Snow. Do you think, after entering the close-range combat state, you can bring the match into your mediocre rhythm? Snow didn't respond to his words and only continued to throw punches silently. Indeed, deck boxing doesn't have a referee. When you stick close like this, no one will come and separate us, the Vikings said. But you seem to have neglected something. At this point, he stretched out his arms and caught Snow in his arms. What? In a split second, Snow's arms and torso above his elbows were encircled by his opponent's thick arms and body, and he couldn't move. Referee. When Feng Bujue saw that the situation was not good, he immediately looked at the person with the broken voice and shouted, "What's going on? Have you changed to a classical wrestling match? Hugging and killing has always been allowed," the person with the broken voice said calmly. Just as the Vikings said, we don't have a referee in this boxing match. So, we have to think of a way to prevent the frequent behavior of hugging the opponent at every turn and trying to wear the opponent down slowly through a battle of attrition. The man with the hoarse voice said calmly, just as the Vikings said, we don't have a referee in this boxing match. TSK. This kind of thing should have been told to us before the fight. Feng Bujue muttered under his breath, but he didn't complain further because he knew that it would be useless to say it now. On the other hand, Snow, who was enduring the Viking's death in his arms, naturally heard the conversation between his brother Bujue and the broken voice. He immediately smiled bitterly and thought to himself, I was too careless. No wonder no one used close-range combat in the previous two matches. The reason the four boxers were walking from the beginning to the end is because no one wants to stick close to the opponent and engage in a game of strength. While he was thinking, his body started to creak. It seemed like the bones in his arms and the ribs in his torso were almost at their limits. Kid, broken bones aren't considered a disability. If you think that clenching your teeth and breaking a few bones can make me lose, then you're thinking too much. The Viking had a huge advantage in terms of physique. The death in his arms was obviously a very physically exhausting activity, but he could still find the strength to speak during the process. I advise you to surrender now, so that you can suffer less. Snow laughed. Mr. Champion, you seem to have neglected something. As soon as he finished speaking, something strange happened. Just when the surrounding audience thought that the Viking was about to win, Snow exerted his strength and broke free from his opponent's arms. Oh, you! The Viking was surprised. The strength of the skinny kid in his arms had far exceeded his expectations. Just now, I didn't know I could use this kind of action. I wasn't prepared, so I was a little confused. Snow struggled to break free from his opponent's arms as he gritted his teeth and muttered, "If we're really going to compete in strength, I'm not at a disadvantage." He wasn't wrong. In terms of physical fitness, the players were definitely not at a disadvantage. Although Snow, who had been leveling up the entire time, was weaker in terms of specialization, the physical fitness of character was only related to the level. And the physical fitness of a level 40 player had long surpassed the standard of an ordinary human, by a lot. The Gauntlet of Limits would only restrict combat power that exceeded a certain value, but it wouldn't weaken the wearer's combat power proportionally. For example, if the limit of the gauntlet was below 10, then when a person with combat power of 15 wore it, his combat power would become 10. And when a person with combat power of 10 wore it, his combat power would also become 10. Without a doubt, the original combat power of the Viking and Snow were both above the limit of the gauntlet. Therefore, no matter who had the higher combat power, after wearing the gauntlet, there was no difference in their strength and speed. The difference between them was mainly reflected in the few aspects of height, weight, arm span, and muscle strength. But in this phase of wrestling, these advantages of the Viking were of no use. Damn it. After hesitating for about 10 seconds, the Viking gave up. He knew that in this duel of grip and struggle, the latter would save more effort. If this continued, he would be at a disadvantage. Therefore, he suddenly diverted the force and retreated 2 steps to the side, taking advantage of the situation to launch 2 punches at Snow. Snow's reaction wasn't slow either. The moment the Viking released his grip, he knew that there would be a follow-up move. He didn't stop making evasive movements. Once again, he assumed a super low posture, swayed his body left and right, and once again displayed the oppressive tactic of constantly charging forward. Do you really think you can win with this kind of punch? The Viking retreated, defended, punched back, and maintained a distance. If this was a regular match, your tactic would probably be considered a success. Those punches of yours that landed on the outside of my torso, which didn't hurt or itch, would be used as the basis for the end of the round. He paused. As he spoke, his movements weren't messed up at all. But in this boxing match on deck, do you think my stamina will be depleted by your attacks first? Or you'll be KO'd by me first? Snow didn't respond to the Viking's words. He still followed his original plan and rhythm, continuing with the kind of entanglement attacks that made it difficult for both parties to display any advanced techniques. Hey, that guy called Snow. You're too much of a rascal. What man with the most gorgeous moves? Even if I go up, I'll be stronger than you. If you're boxing properly, you bastard. This isn't a fight between kids. Viking, finish him off. Go for it. Such a match was bound to arouse the dissatisfaction of the audience. Their reactions had already explained everything. He's indeed an admirable opponent. Hong Hu, who was standing at the side of the ring, revealed a rather solemn expression. Even though he used that kind of tactic, he didn't show the slightest bit of agitation. Even though he's angry, his control of his body is still so calm. Simply put, he wasn't brought into our rhythm. Fong Bujue continued. Yeah, if it were someone else, they might have given up on that kind of beautiful boxing and adopted the same tactic as us, hitting Snow's liver instead. Hong Hu added. That's normal, Fong Bujue said. The strong should be like that. If he gave up what he's best at and lowered himself to entangle with the weak, the risk of losing would increase instead. He paused for half a second. Of course, all these are within my calculations. His gaze shifted to the Viking's face, and he laughed. Please fight to the end, and lose the match fair and square. Chapter 13:11. The contest was still going on. Snow's close-quarters fighting style was gradually showing results. Even though the Viking had a robust torso and outstanding resistance, he was unable to withstand the frequent liver attacks without sustaining any injuries. If the Viking had chosen to use the same fighting style as Snow to engage in close-quarters combat, he would have won long ago. However, he did not do so. Just as Fon Bujua had said, the Viking wanted to perform beautiful boxing. Not only did he want to win, he also wanted to prove that he was better than his opponent in terms of technique. This was a kind of conceit, but it was not too much. The Viking was very clear that he was a boxing genius. Even if he did not mention his skills that had been tempered thousands of times, just the intuition of being able to see through the opponent's distance in an instant was something that ordinary people could not achieve. Therefore, he had always believed that it was natural for him to give way appropriately in a match. Previously, he had purposely left an opportunity for the mirror shield to allow his opponent to make a final attack. This was his intention. Now, he had already fought a match, yet he was going to duel with Snow again. Furthermore, even after his opponent had used such an unsightly method, he still did not give up on his principles. This was also his intention. This was his resolve as a powerhouse, and it was his most fundamental belief. Even if he lost here today, this belief would not waver. Pooh. You're quite stubborn. Snow stuck close to his opponent, his fist still hammering the Viking's liver. Judging from your footsteps, you've obviously been affected. The Viking laughed. So what? TSK. What an infuriating reaction. Snow sneered unhappily. I've put down my dignity, used such extreme methods, and worked hard until now. Yet, you're responding to me with such an attitude? You're right. The Viking sneered and muttered softly, my obsession with winning isn't that strong to begin with. If I can't use my overwhelming boxing technique to defeat my opponent, then victory would be meaningless to me. Just like today, if the person who won in the end was you, I wouldn't mind because I wasn't defeated by your boxing, but by your tactics that embarrassed even yourself. Hearing this, Snow was silent for a moment. Then, he actually stopped hammering and took a few steps back. Seeing this, the Viking was not in a hurry to attack. He only asked suspiciously, What? Are you finally ready to have a fair and square with me? Fair and square. Snow repeated the words. His gaze and tone became very cold. Your style of boxing is called fair and square, and what I've done so far is called slick and slippery. Huh. The Viking opened his arms and asked with a smile, Isn't that so? That's right. You rascal, you're just slick and slippery. To think that you still have some self-awareness. It's not just slick and slippery, it's simply despicable and shameless. The surrounding pirates also heard the conversation between Snow and the Viking. In an instant, there were curses everywhere. Stop joking, be *starred. Unexpectedly, Snow, who had always been very gentlemanly, shouted at this moment. Close combat attrition is a very common tactic in formal boxing matches. How can this be called slick and slippery? Don't tell me that only when I use the style that you're best at, then it's fair and square? The Viking was stunned by the question. After a few seconds, he replied, Indeed, close combat is also a type of technique. It's not against the rules. Also, what do you mean by my obsession with winning is not that strong? Snow did not give up and continued. People like you who have the mindset of regardless of winning or losing, as long as you can fight beautifully, you don't deserve to win at all. What? The Viking was also curious. You're saying that I don't deserve to win? He laughed dryly. Then does that mean that your dirty boxing is qualified to win? Of course it is. At this point, Snow's posture had also changed. He looked like he was about to launch an attack. No matter how you belittle this kind of boxing, whether you call it ugly or filthy, it is still boxing. The gorgeous boxing performed by a genius and the practical boxing performed by a weakling are the same. Weaklings are unable to defeat their opponents in the field of geniuses, so they give up the gorgeous boxing that they also love, and even their dignity, all for the sake of using victory to prove their strength and hard work. How can you understand the feelings of the weak? The goals that they can achieve in their lifetime are easily achieved by those with talent. And you, a person brimming with talent, are still saying things like, victory is meaningless to you. This is simply outrageous. TSK. What a bunch of fallacious reasoning. The Viking snorted. It's my freedom to fight however I want. If you don't like me, then come and win against me. He paused. Unfortunately, you weaklings can't win against me at all, right? Since that's the case, why don't you show some awareness of the weak? Instead of using those so-called practical boxing to make some boring attempts, why don't you show me your gorgeous boxing and let me defeat you beautifully? That'll be more satisfying. The awareness of the weak. Snow muttered. Then he sneered. Ha! All right, I'll let you experience the awareness of the weak. After he finished speaking, a murderous look appeared in his eyes. The Viking also felt something. He reorganized his posture and was ready for battle. At that moment, Snow's figure moved swiftly. A combo, is it? And it's a combo of more than 4 punches with a backup move. The Viking had already tested the distance of his opponent, and he also keenly judged his opponent's moves at the first moment. It's not much of a threat to me, he thought to himself, but it's still better than close combat. At least it's more interesting to neutralize such an attack. As he thought of this, Snow's first punch arrived. Bang, 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 2 thrusts. Straight. The Viking's heart was incomparably calm. In that instant, he had already captured the direction of his opponent's next punch. Next is an uppercut from the chin. Whoosh, his judgment was not wrong. Snow had indeed thrown out that punch. The Viking took half a step back and easily dodged it. He thought to himself, there's a problem with the speed of this punch. This means it's not over yet. There's still a hidden straight punch at the end. Snow's actions were completely within his opponent's expectations. After that uppercut, he raised his right hand with all his might. He's a weakling after all. Facing this final blow, the Viking appeared very relaxed. His train of thought was very clear as he thought unhurriedly. This is also a terrible habit that most second-rate boxers can never change. Every time they use a combo of more punches, at the last 1 or 2 punches, they will throw out a telephone punch, a punch that doesn't contain any concealment or feints. Most punches thrown out by ordinary people are like this. Before the punch is thrown out, the movements of the arm and body have already clearly foreshadowed the path of the punch. To a professional boxer, this is like a phone call where there is ample time to answer. This is an almost instinctive action. Even if a huge amount of training is used to correct it, it might not be able to be changed because muscle memory can be trained. But some people's brains just can't keep up. When the Viking saw the telephone punch, he decided to end the match. His method was also very simple. He took a step forward and swung out an attack that arrived first, even though it was launched later. Under the premise of seeing through the opponent's next punch, this was the most effective and most entertaining way to break the move. This kind of one-hit KO with ease was also the winning method that the Viking had been pursuing and implementing all along. The Viking swung his fist. It was as though he could already see snow falling to the ground, as though he could already hear the lines announcing his victory. However, at this moment, an astonishing change occurred. What? This was the first time the Viking shouted these 2 words in his 47th boxing match on deck, because his confident KO punch had missed. Snow's telephone punch was real and not a feint. Perhaps Fong Bujue, who possessed the zero-time difference calculation, could follow up with such a complicated trap move after a multi-hit combo. However, Snow's ability was clearly insufficient to support such a move. But Snow still did not get hit. This was because when his opponent's volley came, when his own telephone punch had already been launched, he did something that normal people could not do. He took a step back. It sounded like a trivial matter, but in reality, it was an action that was infinitely close to impossible. The difficulty was roughly equivalent to turning your right hand clockwise and turning your right leg counterclockwise. Because of this, he threw out an impossible punch, a counterpunch while retreating. What was originally a telephone punch that was launched later than his opponent had turned into a breathtaking, inconceivably good punch in the span of this step. If one wanted to dismantle this action, it would be a counterattack aimed at a counterattack. From this, it could be deduced that including the preparation for this punch, all his previous combo could be part of a trap. But did he really think so much? Not at all. That step back, that stroke of genius that was impossible to achieve with a normal brain, was actually the result of his title ability. Follower, title ability, frowny face name. Ultimate dodge, best effort type. Special ability type. Active, consumption. 100 stamina points. Effect. During activation, the body will automatically dodge all attacks that theoretically can be dodged. Duration, 5 seconds. Cooldown, 1 hour. Remark, I don't recommend you to use it in the face of a very intensive attack, because it is likely to cause you to suffer more serious damage than the attack itself. Snow's title was undoubtedly obtained by leveling up with the big brothers in the studio for a long time. Therefore, the ability of this title was a bit deceptive. Although the consumption of this skill was not high, and the effect was beautiful, it was a bit terrible when used in reality. For example, if Snow were to activate dodge, best effort type, when he was being fired at by a machine gun, whether or not he could dodge all the bullets was another matter. In any case, his body would most likely twist and become seriously injured. However, in this kind of confrontation, this skill became the key to turning the tables. Except for the 3 players, no one knew that long before the fight started. Fong Bujue, who could see the data of his teammates, had set up a strategy based on this title ability. Snow's title skill was nothing special, but it was precisely the foundation of all tactics. Brother Ju and Snow were very clear that relying on close combat alone would not solve the problem. If the Viking flew into a rage out of humiliation and fought with Snow, then Snow would lose very quickly. Even if the Viking kept enduring, it was not certain that he would not be able to find a normal KO opportunity. Therefore, close combat was just a means to create an illusion. Snow worked hard for a long time, not because he wanted to win by exhausting stamina, but because he wanted to use this kind of behavior to set a trap for the Viking. Ordinary traps were useless against the Viking. In front of a true expert like him, ordinary tricks were useless. Provocation and other actions were mostly futile. These were all proven in actual combat. In order to deceive the Viking, he had to put in more effort in areas other than boxing, such as acting. Snow's final performance was naturally within the plan. His hot-blooded speech was not an emotional speech. This guy was never a weakling. It was to pave the way for changing the fighting style. Under such circumstances, when Snow suddenly assumed an offensive stance, the Vikings would think that his actions were due to his emotions and would not feel anything unnatural. At this moment, the Viking would definitely not consider the matter of this guy can knock me down with a beautiful punch, because he already had a rough understanding of Snow's standard from the previous fight. That endless close combat not only wore down the Viking's stamina, but also made him more vigilant against Snow. With all the conditions in place, Snow rushed forward. After activating the ultimate dodge, best effort type, Snow's body was equivalent to being controlled by 2 forces. Snow's own thoughts were controlling his body to attack, while the power of the skill was responsible for controlling his body to make evasive actions. Normal technical actions, no matter how brilliant and concealed, the Viking might not be unable to see through them. However, Snow's technique, which was similar to left and right mutual fighting, one hand drawing a circle, the other drawing a square, was something the Viking had never experienced before and could not predict. Therefore, the man who had not lost in 46 battles helplessly fell under this marvelous retreating counterpunch. At this moment, the deck was completely silent. The 3 players were also holding their breaths as they watched attentively, praying. They hoped that this group of NPCs would not be able to see Snow's use of skill. Chapter 13:12. Even though the effect of the ultimate dodge, best effort type, title was a little ridiculous, strictly speaking, it was still a causality skill. When it was activated, It did not release any external energy or obvious special effects. After the Viking fell to the ground, at least among the NPCs present, none of them could see the problem with it. Thus, the players successfully deceived the NPCs. At this point in time, they had already completed 2 of the 3 side missions. As for the remaining mission, help Blackbeard find his old subordinates on Devil's Maw Island. They would have to wait until they reached the island. Before the boxing match ended, it was already dusk. After the match, the sun was about to set. However, there was no such thing as sleeping at night when sailing at sea. The Sea of Chaos was like a temperamental lady. Regardless of day or night, you had to be prepared to deal with her various moods. Otherwise, you would have to pay a terrible price. Thus, even when night fell, the pirates only slowed down slightly. Everything else was basically the same as during the day. Just like that, the Queen Anne's revenge continued to move forward in the night. The tranquil night and soothing wind made it difficult for people to feel the passage of time. However, the experienced sailors could feel the turbulent undercurrent in this tranquility. The night was getting darker, but the view of the sea was better than in the evening. Unknowingly, a blood moon was hanging high in the night sky, reflecting the Black Sea into a dark red color. Feng Bujue and Hong, who had seen such a celestial phenomenon before, they knew that it meant that they were not far from their destination. Guys, we can already see the shadow of the island. Soon, a shout came from the lookout deck, confirming their thoughts. The lookout was no longer the one during the day. After all, the people in this position were not allowed to rest, so they had to find a few people to take turns. The lookout's voice was loud and clear. It was clear that he had some special ability related to sound. His voice could penetrate the entire ship and be heard by everyone on board. Creak! 10 seconds after the shout, the door of the captain's cabin opened. Blackbeard walked out with his invisible pressure and walked up to the helmsman's platform with a solemn expression. When he passed by a cadre, he naturally took the binoculars from the cadre's hand. Lower the sails and reduce the speed. Then, Blackbeard issued a new instruction in a voice that was just loud enough for the crew on deck to hear. Before he finished speaking, the pirates started to get busy in an orderly manner. As for Feng Bujue and the other 2, as guests, they did not need to participate in this work. After all, they did not know how to operate such a large multi-masted ship. Thus, the 3 of them who had nothing to do gathered at the bow of the ship and used their superior eyesight to look into the distance. As expected, the landscape has changed a lot. Hong, who was, after all, an archer. His S-rank marksmanship was more useful than binoculars in certain situations. He could already see the trees on the island. After our last adventure, it is understandable that it has changed beyond recognition, Feng Bujue said smugly. Snow wanted to say, "Are you guys monsters? Why did you change the landscape just by taking a stroll?" But when he thought about the fate of the brown algae, he chose to swallow his words. Instead, he said, "Then, can I take it that the experience that you 2 have from your last visit will not be of much use in this scenario?" That should be the case. Hong, who replied, Devil's Maw Island was originally a land of exile, an existence similar to a prison. But before we left last time, the chief designer of this island, or rather, the warden, had already died. Under this premise, who knows how many years have passed in the main world? We really have no idea what the situation on the island is like now. But I can confirm one thing. To everyone's surprise, Brother Ju followed up with something that was quite surprising. "Oh," Hong, who was confused. "Did you come here again after the Team Nightmare Instance dungeon?" "Not really," Feng Bujue replied. "It's just that." He raised his hand and pointed at the blood moon in the sky without turning his head. "That, you should have seen it quite a few times, right?" "You mean the blood moon?" Hong, who asked. "That's right." Brother Ju nodded. Hong, who said thoughtfully, "Indeed, I have seen the blood moon in many scenarios, and those scenarios seem to take place in the main universe." He paused and looked at Brother Ju. "I have long suspected that there is a connection between the 2, but I have never had the chance to solve this mystery." At this point, he turned to look at Feng Bujue with an inquiring gaze. Brother Ju saw this and smiled. He shrugged and replied, "Actually, it is not a mystery. The truth is, wherever the blood moon appears, it means that the forces of the Phantom Church are active in the area." Oh, when Honghu heard those words, he showed a look of realization. So, is the Phantom Church? Sigh. So the blood moon is. He did not continue. Instead, he held his chin and his eyes moved quickly. It looked like the key information given by Feng Bujue helped Honghu solve a series of problems. He needed a certain amount of time to stitch together the many fragmented clues in his mind. Brother Ju and Snow were smart people. They knew what Honghu's reaction meant, so the two of them did not disturb him and just waited silently. After about 3 minutes, Honghu smiled awkwardly and said, "Sorry, my brain is a little slow. It's okay." Feng Bujue immediately followed up with a compliment that was very characteristic of the Feng family. In this day and age, having a brain is already rare and commendable. It is meaningless to be demanding for speed. The moment these words entered his ears, Honghu narrowed his eyes and gave Brother Ju a sidelong glance. "Do you know, every time I come into contact with you, it is a good opportunity to test how much I have grown?" Ha! That faint irritation and impulse, as well as the temperament to suppress them, reminds you that you're more mature than before, right? Feng Bujue summed it up quite accurately. How about we talk about the Phantom Church? Honghu did not intend to continue the conversation with the other party on that topic. "Sure," Feng Bujue said, "I can be considered one of the 3 big bosses of this organization. If there is anything you don't understand, just ask. I will answer you selectively according to my mood and the value of the information." Beep. In the next second, Honghu made a muted sound from his mouth. It seemed that his agitation had brought out some discordant tone particles. "What's wrong? Is that church very powerful?" Snow, who did not know the truth, asked curiously when he saw Honghu lose his composure. The Phantom Church is a secret society in the main universe, founded by 3 world elites whose strength is second only to the 4 pillar gods. The number of believers, specific goals, overall combat strength, and so on are all unknown. Honghu explained. According to the information released by the officials, as well as the summaries and guesses of some players on the forum, the 3 leaders should be Salmon Tier, Taliome, and Soul Snatcher. Soul Snatcher has been killed. Feng Bujue interrupted at the right time. "And then you took over, right?" Honghu turned to look at Brother Ju and replied, "Nope." Feng Bujue spread his hands. "I got involved before he was killed. It was during the S2 preliminaries. I got involved through Salmon Tier's connections. But at that time, the preliminaries were not publicly recorded, so no one knew about it. How many more hidden identities do you have? How many high-ranking existences in the main universe have you colluded with? Speaking of which, you can even call the war demon. What the hell are you doing?" Honghu adjusted his glasses and asked a few questions that were close to sarcasm. He also knew that this kind of information was not easily divulged. However, Feng Bujue was an unpredictable person. At that moment, Brother Ju actually replied in a very relaxed tone, "If you want to ask this." He paused for half a second and continued. "Let's put it more broadly. Now, all the high-ranking forces in the main universe, except for the War Demon and Blackbeard, are basically my little beep." Chapter 13:13. The ship slowly sailed into the sea where Devil's Maw Island was located. The island, which was covered by the purple fog and had an unknown size, had now fallen apart. From afar, pieces of debris of different sizes could be seen dotting the surface of the sea, exposed to the light of the blood moon. "Captain, the terrain ahead is too complicated. We can't sail any further." When the Queen's Revenge, which had lowered its sails and slowed down, approached the debris of the island, the lookout shouted at Blackbeard again. Blackbeard's reaction was also very decisive. After hearing the lookout, he gave an order almost without hesitation. Drop anchor. After all, it was a festival mode with rewards. The difficulty of the players was very different from when they queued up for the Team Nightmare dungeon. The last time they came to Devil's Maw Island, Feng Bujue and Hong, whose levels were only a little higher than the current snow, and their combat power was obviously not as strong as the high-level NPCs on the island. Moreover, the poisonous purple fog completely covered the sky above the island. Not only did it limit the player's ability to control the air, but it also added a debuff that causes discomfort such as hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain, and so on, to a high degree. If not relieved, it will cause a sharp drop in all values. Worse still, the system constantly issued stage missions that directly erased if you can't complete it. But now that they had landed on the island, the situation was very different. Not to mention how much the combat power of Brother Ju and Hong who had increased, and not to mention how much trouble the dispersal of the poisonous fog would save everyone. The most important point was that the entire Blackbeard Pirates was now in an alliance with the players. To put it more bluntly, there was a whole ship of powerful cannon fodder for Brother Ju and the others to use. Garlic, Godfrey, Marty. As soon as the ship came to a stop, Blackbeard, who was on the helmsman's platform, glanced at the deck and then ordered the three of them. The three of you will lead 10 people to go down and check it out first. Yes, Captain. Garlic didn't hesitate when it came to the captain's orders. He immediately responded and gave Godfrey and Maddie. Only then did the players know Brother Thymouth's real name, a look. The two of them understood and immediately took action. They were so efficient in their work that, in 3 minutes, Garlic and Godfrey had prepared the boats for landing, and Maddie selected from the crowd 10 of the most junior sailors on board. After the 13 men boarded the ship, the pirates on the deck used a rope to smoothly lower the small boat that was fixed to the side of the Queen's Revenge. Whoosh! As soon as the boat was in the water, the 12 men, including Godfrey and Marty, took up their oars and began to row forward. Row slowly. Pay attention to the water. Garlic was the only one who wasn't rowing, but his task was more tiring. At this moment, he held a skull-shaped searchlight in his hand and sat at the bow of the ship, paying close attention to the wind and the grass in front of him. In this area, full of hidden reefs, it was relatively safe to use this kind of small boat to sail. Basically, there was no need to worry about hitting the reefs. Of course, Big Brother Garlic wasn't worried about hitting the reefs. He was worried about other things, the three of you. After sending out the scouting team, Blackbeard came to the 3 players and said, "There are some things that I can tell you now." Oh, Fong Bujue felt that there was a hidden meaning in Blackbeard's words. You mean, these things weren't convenient to talk about earlier? Yes, Blackbeard replied expressionlessly. Blackbeard replied expressionlessly. Because you might regret cooperating with me after hearing it, or take the opportunity to bargain with me. Hong, who analyzed some information for Blackbeard's words, and immediately said, "So, at this moment, we don't even have any room to bargain." Blackbeard laughed. His laughter revealed the despicableness and untrustworthiness that a pirate should have. That kind of leeway has never existed. If you think it exists, then I must have deliberately made you feel that way for some purpose. Okay, I didn't expect you to be trustworthy. Fong Bujue shrugged nonchalantly and said, "Tell me, what is it? It started a few months ago." Blackbeard continued. "At that time, I had just returned to this ship. In order to make the journey more efficient, I sent out a spy with special abilities. His main task was to help me find out the whereabouts of my former subordinates in various parts of the main universe. He also wanted to confirm if there were any changes to the locations where I hid my treasures. Let me guess." Fong Bujue said, "Is that spy a black shadow who likes to dance?" As soon as he said this, Blackbeard's expression changed slightly. However, he quickly concealed his emotions and sneered. "Haha, you know a lot. It's okay. Go on." Fong Bujue's tone was still relaxed, giving off an unfathomable feeling. Long story short, Blackbeard did not want to reveal too much information to them. After a few sentences, he used the phrase "long story short." The last time Dancing Shadow sent me a message was when he came to this Devil Chomp Island. As Blackbeard spoke, he reached into the pocket of his captain's coat and took out a silver conch that was bigger than an ordinary mug. "This is this psychic conch that he used to send me messages. You can touch it." Touch. Snow was immediately suspicious because when he saw the item, His first reaction was that it should be a device similar to a recording device. They only needed to listen. But Blackbeard had told them to touch it. "Yes, touch it with your hands," Blackbeard replied as he turned his gaze to Snow. Seeing this, the three players immediately exchanged a look and came to a consensus. They placed their hands on the silver conch almost at the same time. At that moment, a messy piece of information flowed into their minds like an electric current. Phantom Demon Church. Guard. River of Time. Lost Power. Anomaly. Summoning. For Gods. Revenge. The content was not sound or image. It was purely information. It was as if someone had directly transferred a part of their memory into their brain. Whoa! Snow's mental power was weaker. After he received the message from the psychic conch, he staggered and almost fell. Feng Bujue and Hong, who could still stand, but they did not place their hands on the conch for too long because they could feel that this thing had the property of mental corruption. Several seconds later, Feng Bujue looked at Blackbeard and tossed out a rather constructive question. "How long has it been since the last time Dancing Shadow sent you a message?" Blackbeard's answer was, "Long enough, so long that I do not wish to see him again." Chapter 13-14. Even though Devil's Maw Island had fallen apart, the size of the island was still unknown. It was impossible to determine the size of this broken island just by looking at it from where they had landed. In addition, the deadly environment on the island made them cautious. Therefore, it was necessary for them to explore the way. 5 minutes after they entered the water, Garlic led the exploration team safely past the shoal in front of the Queen's Revenge. Since there was no fog on the sea and Garlic had a lantern in his hand, the pirates on the big ship could directly see the movements of the people on the small ship. After a short pause and observation, Garlic held the skeleton lantern in his hand and was the first to set foot on the beach. There was a saying among the pirates: "Never set foot on an unfamiliar land with bare feet." Although Garlic was not a cadre, he was still a senior member of the Blackbeard Pirates. It was impossible for him not to have heard of this saying. Therefore, when he was preparing the small ship, he deliberately put on a pair of loose boots. Some people might find it strange. This was not a mountain of swords or a sea of flames. It was just a beach. So what if he stepped on it with bare feet? The answer was whoosh. Garlic stood on the beach for about 3 seconds before the people on the small ship heard a sound similar to that of teppanyaki. Garlic reacted quickly. As soon as the sound was heard, he turned around and leaped back to the small ship. Then he laid his body horizontally on the boat, with his feet dangling over the side of the boat. "It's locust sand. Hurry up and get a knife for me." The Garlic Man was only halfway through his pouncing action when he yelled out. Mahdi, who was sitting at the bow of the boat, was quick to react. He immediately drew his scimitar from his waist and sliced Garlic Head's shoes into pieces. After the sand-stained shoes broke into pieces and fell into the water, Garlic Head turned over, bent his knees, and dived into the water. He quickly washed his feet in the water before he retracted his legs and returned to the boat. TSK. What bad luck. After they were out of danger, Garlic sat down on the small ship and ordered, "Let's go back. We can't go ashore here." The crew on the small ship did not say much. They picked up the oars and turned around to return to the ship. On the other side, the players who saw this scene were naturally curious. Snow was the first to ask, "What's going on? Is there anything on the beach? Why did you come back before going ashore?" Feng Bujue and Hong, who didn't know what was going on, so they didn't immediately respond. "Looks like it's locust sand." However, the knowledgeable Blackbeard had already seen through the clues. "Oh," Feng Bujue played along and asked tentatively, "Is the sand on the beach some kind of corrosive substance?" "Not matter, but animal," Blackbeard replied. Locust sand is an animal that looks very much like ordinary sand. "Let me guess." Snow smiled for some reason. "Or a carnivore?" "Not only meat. They also consume furs and textiles, and the digested materials will be converted into new locusts at a certain ratio," Blackbeard replied. "Whoa." When Feng Bujue heard this, he almost instinctively said, "Good stuff. It can be used." "Oh." Hearing this, Blackbeard seemed to think of something and said with great interest, "A long time ago, there was a guy in my pirate group who was involved in architectural design. I can't remember his name. I only remember that he used to design prisons and torture devices for a tyrant in a small country." Blackbeard looked at Brother Jew and said, "In short, that guy's idea was very similar to yours. Under his suggestion, I built a locust sand pond on the ship, specifically used to dispose of corpses. I have to say, that pond is indeed very convenient. As long as you throw the captives in less than a minute, the person and their clothes will disappear completely, and the metal, wood, and paper on their bodies will be left intact. I guess the story is only half here." Hong had vaguely guessed something from the past tense in Blackbeard's words. Blackbeard was speaking English. Blackbeard smiled again and said, "Oh, it's not only half because the next part is the ending." He paused for a second and said, "A month after the pond was built, on a stormy afternoon, the designer accidentally fell in. He used his life to tell me two things. First, he seemed to have forgotten to design an emergency rescue device for the pond in case of an accident. Second, it's not a good idea to breed locusts on a swaying ship." Okay, the story is very touching. Fong Bujua didn't seem to be interested in Blackbeard's story. "You don't mind if I collect some animal samples as a souvenir, right?" "Huh, keep it as a souvenir." Blackbeard felt that these words were very funny. In a sense, it was funny. "Up to you. Do you want me to give you a small boat?" Blackbeard replied. "No, I have my own way," Fong Bujua said, "but I want to ask you for a container to hold the locusts." "Oh," Blackbeard replied. He raised his hand and grabbed something in the air. In the blink of an eye, a glass bottle appeared in his hand. The players had seen this bottle before. It was the bottle that Blackbeard had originally intended to use to hold the brown algae. Fong Bujua accepted the glass bottle from Blackbeard, who had a glint in his eyes. He wanted to say, "Aren't you being a bit too narrow-minded?" But after some thought, he swallowed the words back into his mouth. A few minutes later, Garlic Bro's boat came back. Fong Bujua had already used Jeppo to walk back and forth to the beach. Since Brother Jew's Void Walk had the special effect of standing in mid-air for a period of time, it was not difficult or dangerous for him to collect the sand. After Garlic Bro briefly explained the situation to the captain, Blackbeard ordered the pirates to weigh the anchor and change the location of the landing. However, when the anchor was being weighed, an unexpected situation occurred. "Brats, use your strength. Haven't you eaten your fill?" Mr. Volger, who the players had met below the deck, had come up to the deck and was instructing the sailors to weigh the anchor. On a multi-masted sailing ship, there was naturally no windlass equipment to reel in the anchor, used by modern ships. 90% of the work on this ship was done by manpower, and weighing the anchor was no exception. For the crew of the Blackbeard pirates, this work was not difficult. Some of the officers did not even need to use a rotating shaft, which could be understood as a windlass driven by manpower. They could pull the anchor up with brute force. But right now, in this area near the island where the seabed wasn't deep, the sailors couldn't pull the anchor up even half an inch, even after using all their strength. "Let me do it." Just as the sailors in charge of weighing the anchor were in trouble, the bottle opener, who had lost the first round of the deck boxing match, stood up. Although he had lost the boxing match, he was quite strong under the premise that his strength was not limited. Especially in the aspect of strength, the bottle opener was confident that he was not inferior to some of the officers on the ship. "Oh, it's you, kid. Just in time." When Volger saw that it was the bottle opener who came to help, he quickly asked the minions next to him to step aside. "Get up, let him do it." The bottle opener did not hesitate. After the crowd had made some space, he ignored the rotating shaft and directly grabbed the chain that held the anchor. He took a breath and started to pull. This tug of his was really effective. The anchor did not move at all, but the ship tilted a few degrees. After a few seconds, the bottle opener was obviously out of strength. He let go of his hand and fell to the ground. "Hey, what's going on?" Not only him, but the people around him were also surprised. Even the ship was moving, but the anchor still did not move. This definitely had nothing to do with the sailor's strength. The anchor is stuck under the water. At this moment, Hong Hu came over and gave the pirates a possible hypothesis. Volger heard this and turned to look at him, but did not respond. However, he still took Hong Hu's advice and said to the pirates, "Did you hear that? What are you waiting for? Go down and have a look." As soon as he finished speaking, the pirates near the ship's railing looked at each other. After a few seconds of hesitation, 4 of them flipped over the railing and jumped into the water. On Blackbeard's ship, even the lowest level of the sailors were skilled. Diving from a high platform, the deck was still a distance from the surface of the water, was not a problem at all. Staying underwater for 3 to 5 minutes was also a basic skill, but the ability to see in the dark was not something that everyone could do. The 4 who jumped into the water just now could see at most 2 meters away from them. Although they could not be compared to Erdini, who sacrificed himself during the day, they were still much better than ordinary people. Time passed by as they waited. As the 4 men dived for a long time, the thoughts and state of mind of the people on the deck changed subtly. "We can't wait any longer." Suddenly, Fong Bujua walked over and said, "I'll go down and have a look too." The eyes of the pirates and players were instantly attracted to him. Even Blackbeard, who was standing far away, could not help but look over from the corner of his eyes. This is a little surprising." Snow could not help but complain softly. In this situation where there is only danger and no benefits to be gained, he actually stepped forward. I've already given up on the idea of figuring him out." Hong Hu, who was standing beside him, heard this and immediately chuckled. He lowered his voice and replied. As the 2 of them were talking, Brother Bujua was ready to go. However, they saw him take out the oxygen pipe and put it in his mouth. Without saying anything, he climbed up the railing. 2 seconds later, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Fong Bujua stood up on the railing. Then he opened his arms and fell forward. Using the leap of faith, he jumped into the cold, chaotic sea in front of him. Chapter 13:15. This time, the system did not give Fong Bujua any restrictions. In the dark sea, he could see a lot of things with his data perspective. So, after jumping into the water, Brother Ju saw the situation below at a glance. He saw an octopus bigger than an African elephant lying on the seabed, using its body to wrap around the anchor of the Queen's Revenge. The 4 pirates who went down to check were all wrapped up in the tentacles of the octopus. They're the crew of the Blackbeard pirates. They are still alive. Fong Bujua thought to himself as he dove down. Judging from the situation when the bottle opener pulled the anchor, the weight of this octopus should be heavier than the entire Queen's Revenge. However, the size of the octopus is not even 1/3 of the size of the latter. This shows that the monster's body is extremely dense. Being sucked in by this kind of creature, even metal can be deformed. Normal humans would definitely be squashed into meat paste in an instant. But these few crew members were able to hold their breath until now. Although Brother Ju did not know how to swim, by using Jeppo, moonwalk, underwater, he could still maintain high mobility. Not long after, he was already close to the target. Whoosh! It was too late to say so. Just as Fong Bujua entered the monster's attack range, a tentacle swept toward him. The difference in size is really frustrating. Fong Bujua did not hesitate. After a short while of complaining in his heart, he summoned my son. As Brother Ju's summoning mastery continued to grow, this summoned creature that was initially only level D was now a level A fighting power. Actually, from a setting perspective, most of the monsters in the Ultraman series were very strong. They were not only big in size and knew how to dismantle model buildings, they could easily take down a few monsters. Actually, from the setting, most of the monsters in the Ultraman series were very strong. Super, Goo, Gold, Guru, Zhonghua Chop, Galala, Dance. He did not know why, but even though he was underwater with a pipe in his mouth and facing an invertebrate with limited intelligence, Fong Bujua was still stubbornly spitting out bubbles while chanting the name of the skill. In any case, Ma Sun's attack was very effective. For an animal like the octopus, Chop was undoubtedly a method of attack that could restrain it. In just a few seconds, The monster's tentacle was cut into dozens of pieces and scattered in the air. Bang, bang, bang. The next second, 3 consecutive muffled sounds were heard. Perhaps it was aware of the difference in strength, or perhaps it instinctively sensed danger. After fighting Brother Jew, the octopus decisively let go of the ship's anchor, spat a few mouthfuls of ink, and turned to escape. "You are much more cunning than I thought." For Fong Bujue, the ink was meaningless. His way of observation would not be affected by the ink. "Initially, I could have let you go, but under such circumstances, you still plan to take the 4 of them with you. Isn't that a bit too greedy?" While thinking, Brother Jew had already used body enhancement spell, modified, and chased after it with Jeppo. Animals like the octopus, the instantaneous burst of speed was very shocking. They also used the method of spraying water from their body to achieve the purpose of propelling themselves forward. Unfortunately, in terms of speed, Fong Bujue was in the top echelon in the entire main universe. There was no reason for him to lose to such a low-level monster. Chase chop. Ma Sun's duration was enough for Fong Bujue to chop the octopus to death. Of course, in the end, he did not do that. The monster's intelligence was indeed higher than Brother Jew imagined. After being chased, it quickly realized the reason why it was being chased and immediately let go of the 4 pirates who were still sucked in by its suction cups. Seeing that the 4 crew members were saved, Fong Bujue did not pursue further. After all, this was not the kind of game where killing monsters would give experience and equipment, so there was not much point in killing them. Long story short, 5 minutes later, Fong Bujue and the 4 pirates were all back on the Queen's Revenge. At this time, Mr. Volger had also ordered the others to retrieve the ship's anchor. Blackbeard was like an outsider. He watched the whole thing with cold eyes and did not make any comments. After the matter was settled, he urged, "Can we set sail?" The 4 pirates who were rescued only said a few simple thank you to Brother Jew, and it sounded like they were just trying to brush him off. Just like this, after the small storm subsided, the pirate ship set sail again and began to search for a new landing site. At the same time, on the other side of Devil Chomp Island, a figure wearing a monk's robe slowly walked out of the water and stepped on the land of Devil Chomp Island. Although he appeared from the bottom of the water, his body was not stained by a single drop of water. Although he stepped on the beach, the soles of his shoes and the hem of his clothes were not stained by a single grain of sand. It was as if there was an invisible force that isolated him from the surrounding environment. It took longer than expected. The man, who was called Master by Mad Eye, muttered after he came ashore. But at this distance, there is no doubt that Fong Bujue and those 2 guys are out of their detection range. In order to ensure that this second last step of the plan is foolproof, this level of caution is necessary. While he was talking, suddenly, a sound came from the trees near the beach. Master did not show any signs of surprise. He just stood there silently, waiting for the unforeseen event to happen. A few seconds later, a burly man with a black beard that reached his waist walked out from the forest. This Cossack with a ferocious appearance had appeared before Fong Bujue before. In the scenario of Hunter Island, he appeared as Rainsford's servant and was the hidden boss of that scenario. However, Brother Jew did not trigger this plot in that scenario, so he did not encounter him. "It's you." Master looked at the man and said calmly, "I remember. Your name is Ivan, right?" Ivan nodded. He was mute, so this was the only way he could reply. "What are you doing here?" Master asked. Ivan gestured a few hand signs. "Welcoming me?" Master smirked. "Huh, I didn't send you the signal for you to waste your manpower on something so pointless." Ivan heard that and thought about it for a second. Then he knelt down on one knee and lowered his head nervously. "That's enough. Get up." Master waved his hand. "I'm not some kind of demon. If I had to kill someone for something so trivial, I would have no one to rely on." Ivan sighed in relief and stood up from the ground. However, cold sweat was still dripping down his face, and his body was still tense. "Since you're here, lead the way." Master paused for a few seconds and said, "The construction of the new altar should be completed by now, right? Bring me there to take a look." Chapter 13:16. After experiencing the obstruction of the locusts and the giant octopus, the Queen Anna's Revenge set off again. Due to the complicated terrain around Devil's Maw Island, the pirate ship could only circle around at a slower speed. About 30 minutes later, they came to a beach made of rocks, which looked like a suitable landing spot. Just like last time, Blackbeard sent Garlic Bro and his two brothers to lead a team of about 10 people to explore the shore. This time, they didn't even need a small boat. They directly jumped into the water from the deck of the ship, waded through the water to the rocks, and then set foot on the island. Things went smoothly. Not long after, the dozen people had already checked the beach and the woods near the beach. They didn't find any danger, so they signaled the people on the ship. After Blackbeard received the signal, he decisively gave the order to personally lead 4 officers, 10 crew members, and his 3 allies to the island. In addition, he did something that no one thought of. He actually ordered the Mad Eye in the cell to be brought along. Don't worry, the shackles on his hands are specially made. Wearing that thing, he's worse than an ordinary drunkard. While walking on the rocky beach, Blackbeard saw that Hong had been guarding against Mad Eye, so he reminded him. Well, I see. Hong nodded in response. It feels like sea stone, Fong Bujua said. That's not right. Snow continued. There are 2 main characteristics of sea stone. One is that it can make the devil fruit ability user weak and unable to actively use their ability. The second is that it is abnormally hard. These 2 characteristics are meaningless to Mad Eye. First of all, he is not an ability user. Second, from the fact that he tore your equipment with his bare hands, it won't be too difficult for him to break the shackles of sea stone with brute force. In summary, hey, are you done yet? Fong Bujua interrupted the man before he could finish. I said it looks like sea stone, but I did not say it is sea stone. Can you please clarify the question before you come up with an argument? Also, how many times are you going to mention that my equipment was torn? Do I need you to tell me? Do you think I would forget something like that in such a short time? Snow was rendered speechless by Brother Jew's words. Hong shook his head and sighed. He whispered, he's a professor of sarcasm. While they were bickering, a group of people had arrived on the island one after another, including the dozen or so pirates who were already waiting here. The total number of people who had landed this time was exactly 30. Mr. Foam. When everyone reached the edge of the forest, Blackbeard spoke again. Can I trouble you? He looked at Brother Jew and pointed to the sky. To go up and observe the terrain. All right, I was just about to go up and take a look. Fong Bujue readily agreed to Blackbeard's request and immediately took 2 steps back, distancing himself from his 2 teammates. Hong and Snow also knew what he was going to do. In the next second, Brother Jew bent his legs and bent his body down. After accumulating strength for 2 seconds, he suddenly exerted his strength and his whole body shot up like a spring. In the blink of an eye, Fong Bujue had leaped to a height of nearly 100 meters above the sea level. When the momentum of his body's ascent had completely subsided, Brother Jew activated the special effect of Void Tread and stood still in the air. He looked around and realized that although the island in front of him was not small, he could still see the end of it. In addition, in the distant sea, he could see several black shadows that were about the same size as the island. In order to see further, Fong Bujua used Jeppo in midair again and continued to climb. This time, he jumped to a height of nearly 400 meters. When he reached this point, and combined with the data view, he could finally confirm that the originally huge, unified Devil Chomp Island had now been divided into 5 parts, which were roughly in the shape of a cross. The part that Brother Jew and the others were on was the northernmost part of the cross, which was the North Island. Observing from the sky, the East, West, South, and North Islands all had dense forests and undulating hills. The size of each island was about the same. Only the middle island in the middle of the cross was the smallest in size. Furthermore, it was completely made of crystals. That region was undoubtedly the crystal maze from back then. In less than 2 minutes, Fong Bujua slowly descended from the sky. Relying on the special effect of his legendary grade shoes, Brother Jew only needed to ensure that the soles of his feet touched the ground first. No matter how high he fell, he would not be injured. Then, Fong Bujue briefly explained what he saw to Blackbeard. After that, he asked, "Let me confirm something first. This time, your priority is to look for your subordinates or the treasure." "It's the same," Blackbeard answered almost without hesitation. Hong Hu reacted quickly. "Your subordinates and the treasure are in the same place?" "Yes," Blackbeard replied. "Every treasure that I leave in the main universe will be guarded by one of my subordinates. According to the value of the treasure, the strength of the person guarding it will be different." Oh, when Fong Bujue heard this, he thought of something. "Then let me ask you something. The batch on Queen Anna's revenge, is it the most valuable treasure that you left behind?" Blackbeard was not stupid. He instantly understood that Zhang Heng was testing him. "If you want to know if Bunny Hairbro is my strongest subordinate, then I can tell you very clearly. No." He paused, "because, in fact, he is not my subordinate." "Then he is?" Fong Bujue asked again. Blackbeard replied slowly. "Many years ago, I saved Bunny Hairbro's life. He felt that he owed me a favor and always wanted to pay it back. So he boarded my ship and made a living as a pirate for a while. Later, I had a premonition that changes were coming. I had to leave the main universe for a while, so I entrusted my ship and the treasures on it to him. At that time, I estimated that it would take me at most 300 years to return. Before I came back, he helped me guard Queen Anna's revenge. After that, he and I didn't owe each other anything." "Oh, no wonder I didn't see him on the ship," Fong Bujue said. "But it seems that you still haven't answered my question." Blackbeard curled his lips and said, "What I can tell you is that the treasures I hid all over the main universe, no matter in terms of quantity or quality, are all better than the ones I hid on the pirate ship. Because the ship can only fit a limited amount?" At this time, Snow said half-jokingly. Unexpectedly, Blackbeard really answered, "Yes, because the ship can't fit all of them." He spread out his hands and said, "There are also some special things that are not suitable to be left on the ship." "All right." Snow also shrugged and replied non-committally, "Of course." A second later, Blackbeard changed the topic again. "My Queen Anna's revenge itself can also be regarded as a treasure. Its value is one of the best among all the treasures I have." Okay. Fong Bujue saw that Blackbeard's answer was watertight, so he gave up further probing and asking, "I'd better change my question." He paused for half a second and said, "Compared to the subordinate who guarded the treasures on Devil Chomp Island for you, Bunny Hairbro, which one is stronger?" "It has to be Bunny Hairbro," Blackbeard replied in a matter-of-fact tone. "Short-hair Ultimate Fistmaster has the combat power of a demigod. None of the few cadres I have with me now is a match for Bunny Hairbro." What he said had obviously reached the ears of the four cadres, but the four of them acted as if nothing had happened. It seemed that they were all clear about this and had nothing to disagree with. Then, Fong Bujue continued the previous question and asked, "Compared to Dancing Shadow?" "Huh?" Blackbeard sniffed out something from this question. "What do you mean?" "Well, I mean, is it possible," Brother Jew continued, "that it was your subordinate who pocketed the treasure and killed the Dancing Shadow, who came to search for it?" As soon as he said that, all the pirates on the beach turned their heads and looked at Brother Jew. Their eyes looked very strange, and Hong Hu and Snow also noticed that something was wrong. "Huh." After a period of maddening silence, Blackbeard grinned, revealing his rotten teeth, and gave a very rare, kind smile. "Let's put it this way. The one who is responsible for guarding this treasure is my son." Chapter 13:17. After landing on the island, the pirates cleaned up by the beach. They polished their scimitars, filled their guns with gunpowder, and waited for their skills to cool down. The NPCs had similar settings, but they couldn't see the game menu, so they could only rely on their instincts. In short, after 5 or 6 minutes of preparation, they lined up and set off toward the dense forest on the island. The person who walked in front of the team was Mad Eye. This was expected. When Blackbeard mentioned that he was going to bring this guy along, Fong Bujue, Hong Hu, and Snow all guessed that Mad Eye would be used as a guinea pig to explore the way. Following closely behind Mad, it was one of Blackbeard's officers. This officer's name was Nezru. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, but his actual age could be hundreds or thousands. He wore a very ordinary short-sleeved shirt and short pants. He also had a very ordinary scimitar and a gun on his waist. If there was anything that stood out about him, it would be the cake hairstyle on his head. As one could imagine, it was undoubtedly very difficult to maintain such a hairstyle in the sea. Not to mention the officers, even Blackbeard, the captain, would inevitably be exposed to the wind and water. Therefore, in a sense, Nezru's cake hairstyle was more outstanding than any other clothing or items. Following behind Nezru was Garlic Bro and the other two men. As the backbone of the Queen Anna's Revenge, their experience and combat power would be of great help to Nezru when there was an unexpected situation. Then, there were 5 ordinary sailors who were good at fighting. They followed Garlic Bro and the other 3 men, ready to provide support at any time. These 10 people were the vanguard of this treasure hunting team. They were the most dangerous group of people in the team, so they had to be alert at all times. Otherwise, they would be caught off guard by something similar to locusts and lose their lives. The position of Blackbeard and the other 3 players was behind the 10 people, which was the most relaxed and safest position in the team. Looking further back, behind the players, there was an old officer on the ship, Mr. Volger. This old sailor with a bad temper and unpleasant words was naturally not an ordinary person. With him overseeing the team, Blackbeard could save a lot of trouble. The dozen or so people behind Mr. Volger were basically ordinary sailors. The other 2 cadres brought by Blackbeard stayed at the back of the team. The 2 of them were a pair of half-orc brothers. The elder brother was called Mark Hoofbig. His upper body was that of a human, and his lower body was that of a horse. The younger brother was called Mark Neck Thick. His head was that of a horse, and his lower body was that of a human. The 2 brothers belonged to the simple-minded type with extremely developed limbs. They were roughly the type that was very suitable to be a pirate, but it was impossible for them to be a captain in this lifetime. Even if they were, it would quickly lead to the destruction of the ship and the death of the people on board. From the group that Blackbeard had arranged, it was not hard to see that the difficulty of the scenario was not that high. As long as the players were willing, they could stay with the group until they cleared the scenario. That should have been the case. However, even the system could not predict that there would be unexpected factors that were out of its control. In fact, when the master appeared, the direction and difficulty of the whole scenario had already gone out of control. The difficulty of the scenario could not be measured by the usual normal or nightmare because no matter was normal or nightmare, it was the accumulation of a series of causality events that were within the scope of the system's control. However, some of the things that the players were going through were similar to the hyperdimensional invasion. They were not things that the system could control within the rules of the game. Therefore, what would happen next, no one could tell. Just as Fong Bujue and the rest followed Blackbeard's men through the dense forest of the northern island, on the Queen Anna's Revenge, the hunchback man with scabies on his face who called himself Ken also made his move. Ken held a bottle of wine and sat in the corner of the cabin, mumbling to himself, "That guy's already landed on the southern island, hasn't he?" This despair-inducing, super high-energy reaction. I wonder if Fong Bujue has noticed it. So what if he has noticed? Can you guarantee which side he will stand on? Kim was still talking. His voice did not change, but his tone was completely different. That's true. No one can predict that man's thoughts. Kim changed back to his previous tone and laughed. Fong Bujue's appearance was just an accident. In my opinion, we don't have to involve him. After all, when we decided to carry out this mission, we did not intend to rely on the power of a third party. That guy definitely doesn't want to involve Fong Bujue. After all, that is Fong Bujue. Turning other people's hard-earned plans into bubbles and making the whole world go down the wrong path, according to his plan, is what he is best at. You mean to say that involving him will increase our chances of success? That's right. In the current situation, we are the saboteurs, and that guy is the operator. In terms of strength, we are absolutely at a disadvantage. It is impossible for us to fight her head-on. The only advantage we have as saboteurs is that we can take the initiative to attack and do not need to be too methodical. After all, even if we can't deal with that guy, taking care of the Phantom Fiend Church's minions is as easy as blowing off dust. Under this premise, Feng Bujue's intervention and disruption will definitely greatly increase our chances of success. After hearing these words, the other voice was silent for a few seconds before saying, "But even if we assume that Feng Bujue will stand on our side after learning the relevant information, in terms of raw strength, he is no match for 23. Ah, I know. Even if we include you, me, and the other 3 players, we can't do anything to 23 now. But what I am considering is another possibility." "What is that?" "Humph, don't you realize?" The other voice did not answer. 2 seconds later, the first voice said, "Why didn't XEI directly attack our ship when our ship approached the brown algae? There is no doubt that she has already sensed our presence, hasn't she?" He paused. Not only did she not attack, but she also very cautiously escaped outside a certain range. The other voice thought for a moment. "Because she doesn't want Feng Bujue to discover her?" "Correct." The first voice replied. "She probably landed on the South Island to keep a distance from Feng Bujue. Obviously, she can estimate Feng Bujue's detection range very accurately, so she has been avoiding him. This can be used. Well, let's get off the ship too." At this point, the hunchback drunkard who seemed to be talking to himself in a corner stood up. "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.